Chapter 567. Duga's name was Dugayu, because his father and grandfather did not live long. As the eldest son, he became the head of the clan at a young age. But although this person was young, he was very capable. These years, the Duga clan had kept a low profile and did not seek to make a name for themselves in the political arena, but they had managed to avoid many political battles and preserve the Dugu clan's strength. These years, the Duga clan had focused on annexing land and managing grain, gradually becoming one of the largest landlords and grain merchants in the Guangzhou area. Having grain in hand was a kind of strength. Whether in troubled times or prosperous times, no one could do without them. Because of this, the Dugu clan gradually gained a strength that could not be ignored in the political arena. Whether it was decisively withdrawing from the officialdom before, thereby avoiding political calamities one after another, or the natural means of expansion like the blooming of flowers in spring, or the melting of ice and snow, seeking good fortune and avoiding calamity, as if he had the help of God. All these things had happened during the few years that Dugayu had been the head of the Dugu clan. Because of this, although he was young, no one dared to underestimate him. Dugayu was not a quick-witted person, and would occasionally speak clumsily when interacting with others, but he had great wisdom. As long as he carefully considered everything, he would be able to come up with a perfect plan. Because of this, even the head of the Lu clan could not help but ask for his opinion. This junior thinks that it is still too early to talk about splitting the peaches. Dugayu grinned and calmly replied, "Right now, we should strike while the iron is hot. First, we should help the imperial court pull down a few more people. This way, in the future, we will have more positions to choose from and more peaches to divide. Then, we will be able to reason with the aristocratic families of Shandong." Yes, the head of the Wei clan nodded approvingly. Dugu may be young, but his knowledge is extraordinary. This is the principle. So, everyone, do not think about fighting for benefits now. We should concentrate our strength and create more empty seats. With more empty seats, there is no need to hurt the harmony. The head of the Lu clan agreed. If everyone has no other ideas, then go back now and mobilize the power of your respective clans. Make use of this opportunity to fight for a bigger opportunity and begin. Everybody got up one by one and cupped their hands in salute to Old Man Wei and the owner of this place, Shin Gugong. They whispered into each other's ears as they left. Their carriages were parked in the spacious courtyard of the Shen public house. Dugayu left the living room and walked to his carriage. The coachman immediately put down the pedals and whispered in his ear, "Alang, I just received news that Yang Fan has arrived in Chang." "Oh." A playful smile appeared on Dugayu's face. He really came to Chang'an? Hoo-hoo! This person is actually not returning to Luoyang. Indeed, as expected, as expected. Dugayu pondered for a moment, then said with a faint smile, "Let's go. Let's go to Aunt Pei's house and wait for the hare." Sun Yuxuan and Hu Yuanli waited in the living room for a long, long time. Princess Taiping finally appeared. She was radiant and beautiful, just like a bride who had just been showered with rain and dew. Therefore, the two of them glanced at Yang Fan at the same time, their gazes quite playful. There was ridicule, envy, and even more admiration in their gazes. Yang Fan was very helpless. He did not do anything, really did not do anything. He only sat there and watched Princess Taiping happily dress herself up. Finally, under her pretentious pleas, in order to let this princess go to the front hall to receive the guests as soon as possible, he reluctantly picked up the eyebrow pencil and symbolically drew on her closed eyes and smiling face. He also clumsily helped her put on her hair ornament. That's all. He really only did this little thing. But looking at the strange gazes of these two wretched fellows, why did it seem like something had happened between him and the princess? They were looking down on him too much. Would he, Yang Fan, throw away his helmet and remove his armor so quickly? If he used his full strength, Miss Yu would not even be able to walk right now. How could she walk so lightly like a cat? Because Yang Longzhong could not explain it, he could only hold his head high and try hard to put on an appearance of a clear conscience. Yang Fan suddenly discovered that women were born to act. Just a moment ago in the boudoir, Miss Yu, who had a sweet smile on her face, had now changed into a high and aloof royal princess. Her steps were light and graceful. Her posture was elegant and noble, and her smile was tranquil and graceful. When she leisurely walked into the hall, not only did her skirt not move a bit, even the pearl hair ornament in her hair did not sway a bit. Her reception of Hu Yuanli and Sun Yuxuan was also impeccable. Whether it was her attitude or her words, she was kind and amiable, making people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. She was polite and always maintained the dignity and elegance of a royal princess. She was really a beautiful woman who could walk out of the hall. Yang Fan suddenly realized that Sun Yuxuan and Hu Yuanli were also very good at acting. Just now, they looked at him with such a wretched look, but at this moment, in front of Her Royal Highness, their speech and behavior were impeccable, just like gentlemen. Women were born to act, and people who had been officials for a long time were also good at acting. When Princess Taiping met Sun Yuxuan, Hu Yuanli and others, it was not good to let Yang Fan be alone with her again. Princess Taiping had official business to attend to, so she was concerned about the progress of their mission to the south this time. She thanked them for their hard work and inquired whether their accommodation had been properly arranged. After roughly deciding the date of their return to Luoyang, Yang Fan and the others had to take their leave. Princess Taiping knew that it was not the time to be obsessed with her Langjun, and Shaiman was already pregnant. Yang Fan should go to visit his wife first, so she had to reluctantly send them away. At this time, Princess Taiping finally could not continue acting. When she sent Yang Fan and others down the stairs, Princess Taiping finally could not help but gently pull the corner of Yang Fan's clothes and whispered, "Langjun, when will you come to see me again?" Hu Yuanli, Sun Yuxuan, and Ma Qiao had only walked 3 steps down the stairs. Although the voice was soft, how could the 3 of them not hear it? However, the eunuchs and maids behind Princess Taiping pretended not to hear it, so Hu Yuanli and others also pretended not to hear it. Sun Yuxuan was about to turn around and ask the princess to stop, but he had already turned half of his body. Hearing the princess's words, Sun Yuxuan stopped abruptly. He frowned and tried to look at the exquisite 4-corner pavilion in front of him, as if a flower suddenly grew on the tip of the pavilion. Hu Yuanli, with his back to the princess, adjusted his clothes, collar, and sleeves very slowly. Only Ma Qiao stood there straight, like a flagpole, maintaining the character of a soldier. Yang Fan was still not used to this kind of whispering in public. He coughed unnaturally and said in a clear voice, "Your Royal Highness, please stay. We will leave now. When we settle down, we will come to pay our respects to your Royal Highness." Princess Taiping smiled sweetly. What kind of scenery would it be when a graceful and luxurious peony blossomed to its heart's content? It was so beautiful that it could make people's hearts tremble. Yang Fan actually had a feeling that he did not dare to look at it directly. It was a good thing for Ma Qiao. If he missed this day, he would never have the chance to see such a charming and beautiful little woman like Princess Taiping. Originally, he just stood straight, but now even his eyes were straight. As soon as they left the princess residence, Ma Qiao immediately held Yang Fan's arm and sighed in his ear, "Brother Fan, we are really good brothers." "Oh, why do you say so?" Ma Qiao said, "Even when it comes to having an affair, it's so earth-shattering." Aunt Pei's house was in Dunhua Workshop. To be precise, this residence should be called Gong Sun Residence. When Yang Fan rode south alone, Hu Yuanli, Sun Yuxuan, and the others escorted the princess to Chang'an. After sending Princess Taiping to her residence in Yongkong Workshop, they immediately escorted Xiaoman to Dunhua Workshop. So they knew the way. But this time, of course, there was no need to disturb the couple's reunion. So they just pointed the way for Yang Fan, and the group went to see Lu Xuantian. They had more than 300 people. The food for the people and the horses were, of course, arranged by Lu Xuantian. Aunt Pei's husband was called Gong Sun Bufan. He only had a rough knowledge of riding and archery, but did not know martial arts. His wife, Aunt Pei, was good with the sword. Aunt Pei was the younger sister of General Pei Min, the Longhua military envoy of Beiping. Her family's sword skills were very good. Gong Sun Bufan was just an ordinary official's family in Chang'an. He was not famous, and was not as famous as his wife and daughter. The people in Guangzhou loved martial arts and Chang, and had more heroes than heroes. Aunt Pei and Miss Gong Sun did not deliberately hide their outstanding sword skills. Their reputation was naturally known by everyone in Chang. And Yang Fan followed the address Ma Chiao, and the others told him, and went straight to Dunhua Workshop. The roads in the Dunhua Workshop were very spacious. Not only were the intersecting streets wide and flat, even the winding alleys between the residences were very wide. Compared to the narrow alleys in Luoyang, it could be called a main road. The roads were all made of rammed earth. Once there was a heavy rain, the roads would become muddy and impossible to walk on. When the capital was still in Chang, and there were often times when the emperor did not attend court and the yamen did not work because of heavy rain. It had just rained here 2 days ago. After the road was dried, the ruts and hoof prints on the road had not been flattened. Looking at these marks, one could imagine how difficult it was for the pedestrians who were anxious to go home when the rain poured down. There were deep drains on both sides of the road. There was a row of tall locust trees on the drains. 1 or 2 elders and 3 or 5 women were chatting under the locust trees. It was very leisurely and peaceful. Yang Fan walked more and more hurriedly. Although he had asked for the address of Aunt Pei's house from Ma Chiao, he was still not sure after wandering around the workshop. After going around 2 streets, he was about to find someone to ask when he saw 7 or 8 teenagers gathered in front of the door of a house in front of him. They were gesticulating and talking about something. Yang Fan immediately rode to meet them. When he reached the door, Yang Fan was about to open his mouth and ask when he took a look. He couldn't help but laugh. Coincidentally, this house was the Gong Sun Mansion. On the lintel of the door was a horizontal board with the words Gong Sun Mansion printed in gold. Yang Fan happily dismounted and was about to walk up the stone steps to knock on the door. The 7 or 8 teenagers seemed to be arguing about something. When Yang Fan arrived, they stopped and looked at Yang Fan. These teenagers all carried swords and wore arrow sleeves. They looked at Yang Fan with unkind eyes. Chapter 568. Although Yang Fan also felt that these people were a little strange, he was in a hurry to see Xiaoman and didn't want to meddle in other people's business. So he walked up the stairs. Seeing that he was acting as if no one was around, the youths became even more displeased. One of them, about 18 or 19 years old, turned around and stopped in front of him. He sized him up and asked coldly, "You want to enter the Gong Sun Manor?" Yang Fan looked strangely at this chivalrous character, nodded and replied, "That's right. I want to visit the Gong Sun Manor. Who are you and why are you blocking my way?" As soon as Yang Fan opened his mouth, the youths became even more hostile. The youth who blocked Yang Fan's way moved the sword on his belt closer to his hand and sneered, "You're actually a foreigner. It's not that easy to enter the Gong Sun Manor. If you don't show us your skills, I'm afraid it won't be easy." Yang Fan looked at him, then at the few youths who were eager to have a go. He frowned and asked, "May I ask who you are in the Gong Sun family? Is this a rule of the Gong Sun family or yours?" The youth raised his chin and said proudly, "Although I'm not a member of the Gong Sun Manor now, it's hard to say if I will be in the future. In short, if you want to enter the manor, you'll have to show me your skills first. Otherwise, you'd better go back to where you came from." As he spoke, the youth drew his sword from its sheath. Yang Fan's frown deepened and said, "I'm afraid you've misunderstood. I'm not here to provoke you, nor am I here to compete with Miss Gong Sun. It's just that my family is a guest in the Gongsun Manor. I'm here to see them." The youth who blocked his way laughed and said, "Those who want to enter the Gongsun Manor have used all kinds of excuses and methods. Your family is in the Gongsun Manor? If you've caught Miss Gongsuen's eye, then your family might really be in the Gongsun Manor. Draw your sword." What? Yang Fan vaguely understood the crux of the matter. Before he could ask further, the young man had already raised his sword and shouted, "If you defeat me, you can go in. Otherwise, please go back the way you came." Yang Fan looked at this youngster, then looked at the other youngsters who were holding the hilts of their swords. With a turn of his hand, he took his saber from the side of the saddle. He had 2 sabers. One was a scabbard given to him by Xuanqi. The saber was like a broken halberd, able to cut iron like mud. The other was an ordinary standard saber. Yang Fan naturally wouldn't rely on a sharp weapon to bully others, so he reached out and picked up an ordinary narrow saber. When the young man saw him holding a saber, he couldn't help but be stunned. "You actually use a saber?" Yang Fan said, "What is it?" With a flick of his finger, the sword peak let out a draconic roar. The young man was a little intoxicated as he said, "The sword is the weapon of the nobleman. It is the most precious and revered by men and gods. It is easy to carry, elegant, and quick to use. It is the first choice for me to establish a country and help the weak. If you don't use a sword, do you think you are worthy of entering Master Pei's residence? Leave quickly, lest you embarrass yourself." Yang Fan was in a hurry to enter the residence to see his wife, so he didn't have the mood to argue with him. His expression darkened, and he said, "I want to enter the residence, but you insist on stopping me. I followed your orders to fight, but you say so much nonsense. I don't have the time to talk nonsense with you. Either fight or get lost." The young man said angrily, "Fine. If you don't want to leave, then I will chase you away." He straightened his expression and held his sword in front of his chest. The young man with pimples on his face became unusually serious. "I am a swordsman. My surname is Bu, and my name is Ji. This sword is called Dragon Spring. It is 2 feet and 7 inches long, and it weighs." Still talking nonsense. The saber was the overlord of all weapons. With the saber in his hand, Yang Fan also seemed to be a bit domineering. He didn't wait for Buji to finish talking. He tightened his wrist, and the saber turned into a waterfall, slashing towards Buji's head. While Buji was talking, a cold light flashed in front of him. A saber with a hint of wind and thunder slashed towards his face. He was scared out of his wits and hurriedly raised his sword to meet the attack. The sword was a light object, so it couldn't be blocked like this by a saber. The saber and the sword clashed, and with a crack, the sword in Buji's hand broke. The broken sword fell to the ground with a piu sound, only an inch away from Buji's toes. Buji was scared stiff. He held the hilt of his sword with a pale face and couldn't say a word. Yang Fan snorted and rushed toward the door with a saber in hand. The other teenagers were enraged. They drew their swords and pounced on him, shouting sternly, "You cheated and launched a surprise attack. You can't be considered a hero." Yang Fan couldn't help laughing and said in a clear voice, "Gentleman with gentleman's sword, how dare you rush towards me together? Don't you feel ashamed?" Yang Fan said as he walked. There were about 7 steps from where he stood to the stone steps in front of the mansion, and there were 3 steps on the stone steps, so there were only 10 steps in total. Yang Fan held the reins in his left hand and the saber in his right hand. He would stab, chop, hack, sweep, or lift. The saber would move at will, as if it was a waterfall surrounding his body. Yang Fan took 7 steps and struck 7 times with his saber. The ding-dang sound was incessant. When he reached the front door, he saw 7 or 8 Chong and young heroes standing behind him in a daze. They were still in various attacking positions, but their hands were empty. They had no weapons. If their swords were broken by Yang Fan's heavy saber, they might have something to say. But the saber in Yang Fan's hand was even lighter than a sword. Except for one of them whose sword was broken by Yang Fan, the others were hit on the wrist by Yang Fan with the hilt of the saber. They couldn't bear the pain and abandoned their swords. If Yang Fan wanted to hurt them, wouldn't they all become one-armed heroes? If Yang Fan wanted to kill them, then... Thinking of this, the heroes broke out in a cold sweat and couldn't say a word. There were 3 steps in front of him, but Yang Fan had already stopped and didn't go to knock on the door knocker. He didn't know when, but a girl in green had opened the door and stood there looking at him with a smile. She wanted to see him fight, to see his power. The girl had a slender figure and was dressed in an elegant green dress, graceful and charming. Her clear and bright eyes gazed at Yang Fan affectionately and said softly, "You're here." "I'm here." "Oh, you're showing off your power as soon as you come." "That's not up to me. I don't know what's wrong with these young people. Is it the rule of Chang, and to force people to compete in martial arts?" The girl pursed her lips and smiled. "You don't have to care about them. These heroes are all Miss Gongsuen's admirers. They're so annoying. But I like to see you being so domineering. But since you became an official, I can only see your official power. It's rare to see you so free and easy." Yang Fan said, "On the way south, I figured out some things. If you want to see it, I'll show you how domineering I am in the future. Can I watch it for the rest of my life?" "You can watch it for several lifetimes. As long as you don't get annoyed, you can keep watching." Yang Fan smiled and held the girl's hand with a gentle smile. The green-clothed girl also smiled. Her smile was beautiful, and it added a bit of charm. The heroes below the stairs had rarely seen such a scene, and finally knew that they had challenged the wrong person. This battle was really embarrassing. They touched their noses, picked up their gentlemen, and left with their tails between their legs. "Xiaoman hasn't given birth yet, right? How would the little fellow be willing to come out until you, her father, return? But she's been especially noisy recently, so she's probably going to give birth soon. What's up with those young people in front of the door?" "Hey, it's all Miss Gongsuen's trick. Miss Gongsuen's swordsmanship is outstanding and well known in Chang'an. But Mr. Gongsun was very anxious because she hadn't found a husband. He had asked a matchmaker to introduce her to a few young men. But unfortunately, Miss Gongsun didn't like any of them. Seeing that she still hadn't found a husband at the age of 17 or 18, Aunt Pei was also anxious. The old couple forced Miss Gongsun to choose a husband as soon as possible, so Miss Gongsun came up with this idea. She spread the news that she was going to have a martial arts competition to find a husband. Whoever could beat her by a move or 2 would be married. As soon as the news came out, the young heroes of Chang'an swarmed here. The Gongsun Mansion became a martial arts arena. Every day there was endless fighting. Miss Gongsun originally wanted to use this method to force her parents to retract their marriage, who knew that the old couple also hardened their hearts and let you do whatever you want. In any case, she can't not get married. Tian Anu covered his little mouth and laughed, then said, "Unfortunately, in the whole of Chang, and there really isn't anyone whose sword skills are better than Miss Gongsuen's. The Gongsun Mansion was crowded with people a few days ago, but gradually no one came. Those young heroes just now were all defeated by Miss Gongsun, but they still haven't given up. Every day they guard the door and exchange swords, hoping that Miss Gongsun will give them another chance." Yang Fan asked curiously, "Then why did they stop me? If I came to have a martial arts competition, I wouldn't be able to beat them. Naturally, I wouldn't be Miss Gongsuen's match either. Even if they let me in, I would return in failure. If I can be a level better than Miss Gongsun, since they were defeated by her, how can they stop me?" Tenino looked at him with a smile for a while, but didn't answer. Yang Fan raised his eyebrows and said, "What's wrong?" Tenino said sweetly, "I'm guessing that they are afraid that Miss Gongsun will see your elegance and deliberately go easy on you, losing 2 moves to you." Yang Fan couldn't help but laugh and said, "I don't have the looks of Pan and you're exaggerating." Yang Fan was admittedly handsome, but among those young heroes of Chang, and just now, there were at least two who weren't inferior to him in terms of physique and appearance. But which of those young heroes had the same experience as him? Which of them had gone through great calamity since childhood, carried a blood feud, wandered from place to place, and suffered like this? Which of them had traveled thousands of miles at a young age and experienced great winds and waves? Which of them hadn't reached the age of 20, yet hadn't relied on their father and grandfather's shadow, but had relied on their own merits to hold important positions in the Ulan Guard and the Ministry of Justice, one civil and the other military, and had cultivated a dignified bearing? Yang Fan had the demeanor and temperament of a mature man. This kind of demeanor and temperament was the most lethal to young girls in love. How could those hot-blooded young boys compare to him? But most men with this kind of temperament were over middle age and had children. How old was Yang Fan? He had this kind of unique mature charm, combined with the vigor and heroism of a young man, which made him stand out from the masses. Shanghai Wan, and Princess Taiping, these extraordinary women who had their eyes on the top of their heads, fell in love with him one after another. Of course, it was because of Yang Fan's unique charm. Yang Fan himself didn't feel it, but others could feel it. Those young heroes naturally saw him as a great threat. Yang Fan entered the Gongsun mansion, so he naturally had to see the owner of this place first. Otherwise, it would be rude. Tin Ano led him to see Mr. Gongsun and Aunt Pei. There was a courtyard on the left side of the road. In the courtyard was a rockery, and on the rockery was a small pavilion. There were two women in the pavilion, one with a big belly and the other in a fiery red dress. "Shaoman, is that your husband?" The woman in red stood proudly with her hands behind her back and asked the young woman with a big belly, "Yes, he is your brother-in-law." Shaoman beamed with joy. If she didn't know that her husband had to see the owner first, she would have rushed out of the pavilion to meet him. The woman in red said, "Good. Let's see if he's worthy of my junior sister." "Senior sister," Shaoman cried out in alarm. Before she could stop her, the woman in red was like a ball of flame. She swept out of the pavilion and shot toward Yang Fan like an arrow. Chapter 569. Yang Fan and Anu walked side by side into the courtyard. As they walked, he turned his head and looked at Anu's beautiful face. He smiled and said, "How did you appear at the door? Could it be that we have a telepathic connection? You knew at the moment I arrived at the door?" Anu rolled her eyes at him and said, "Don't flatter yourself. Your wife, who has been pregnant for 10 months, has been counting the date of your return every day. She has been sending people to keep an eye on you. Now, more than 300 of you have entered Chang, and in a mighty manner. You first went to Yongkong Square, and then went all the way to the Chang and local government. How could they not see such a big scene?" Speaking of this, Anu smiled at him and said, "You have a conscience. I thought you would go to the local government first before coming back. I have to see the princess. As for the Luoyang magistrate," just as Yang Fan said this, he suddenly saw Anu's eyes suddenly widen, and a flame quickly appeared in her pupils. The flame burned and danced, getting closer and closer, getting bigger and bigger, and almost filling her pupils in an instant. Anu suddenly raised her hand. Her green sleeves fell down, revealing a creamy white wrist. Her slender, jade-like hand stretched out 2 slender fingers, reaching for the silver hairpin in her hair. Yang Fan had been with her for a long time in the Ministry of Justice and knew many secrets about her. For example, her hairpin was also a sharp weapon for killing. Seeing her move, Yang Fan immediately tightened his grip on the hilt and suddenly turned his head. The scabbard was a precious knife. He could not leave it on the back of the horse and let the servants take it away. This sharp weapon was now on his waist. Yang Fan turned his head instead of dodging, because Anu was right behind him. If there was really danger, and he dodged hastily, then Anu would be the first to bear the brunt and become the target of others. Although her expression showed that she was prepared and Yang Fan was also aware of her martial arts, he never had the habit of letting his woman stand in front of him. When Yang Fan turned his head, the scabbard was already halfway out of its scabbard. Then he saw what seemed to be a person, like a ball of raging flames, man and sword as one, rushing towards him. This sword was very long, just like the famous ancient sword Tai. It was much longer than ordinary swords. If it was carried on one's back, it would be very difficult to pull it out. The sword, which was at least 4 feet long, was like a streak of silver frost, like a flash of lightning, stabbing straight at Yang Fan's throat. Behind it was a pair of sharp eyes, full of heroic spirit. What a fast person! What a fast sword! The moment Yang Fan turned around, his saber was already halfway out of its sheath. At this moment he saw the person and the sword in front of him clearly, but with a cha sound, the saber in his hand returned to its sheath. The edge of the sword flashed, reflecting the indigo of Yang Fan's eyebrows. Like a flash of lightning, the long sword slid past Yang Fan's neck. The long sword slid for 3 feet, then stopped abruptly, like a pool of autumn water, quietly lying in front of him. Yang Fan raised his eyes to look at that person, and saw a pair of eyes brimming with heroic spirit glaring fiercely at him. This was a beautiful woman, dressed in red. She had long legs and a slender waist, and her skin was as white as snow. But because of her eyes, her entire person was like a sword, more rigid and less gentle. The beauty in red said unhappily, "Why are you like a dumb goose, neither dodging nor drawing your saber?" Her tone was fierce, but her voice was very crisp, just a little neutral. Yang Fan curled his lips and replied indifferently, "Because I am afraid you will lose." A smile immediately appeared in Anu's eyes, but Miss Gongsuin's face turned red with anger, and she sheathed her sword with resentment. This sentence may not be understood by others, but the 3 people present all understood. Gong Sun Lanji had publicly announced that she would marry whoever could defeat her sword. Yang Fan did not draw his saber because he was afraid she would lose. Then the meaning behind his words was, at this time, Anu curiously asked with a smile, "Why did you not counterattack?" Yang Fan took a look at the special sharp sword in Miss Gongsuin's hand and replied, "Because your movement of raising your hand was very fast, but you stopped when you were pulling out the hairpin. The moment I turned my head, I could still see a trace of relief in your eyes. That is definitely not the look of seeing an enemy. I don't know who is coming, but I know that you will not harm me." Anu looked at him. Her bright and beautiful eyes suddenly turned into a pool of spring water. But Yang Fan put on a straight face and said to her, "But this is really too dangerous. With Miss Gongsuin's fast sword, if I dodge carelessly and the direction of the dodge is not appropriate, you will be a widow if she can't retract her sword in time. In the future, do not try this kind of unnecessary risk again." As soon as this sentence came out, Anu's face also turned red. But although she was embarrassed, she did not refute Yang Fan's words. So her face became even redder, like a blooming peach blossom. The red dress girl on the left blushed with anger, and the green dress girl on the right blushed, contrasting beautifully. Yang Fan stood in the middle and said to Gong Sun Lanji with a straight face, "The relationship between a man and a woman is not a martial arts competition. If you marry someone who can defeat you, that is too hasty." Just as Miss Gong Sun opened her mouth, Yang Fan said again, "I know you're very confident in your swordsmanship, but there is always someone better than you. What if there is someone who is better than you, and you don't want to marry him? You treat life like a child's play. Even if there is a man who really likes you, he will be scared away by you." Gong Sun Lanji said angrily, "Are you teaching me a lesson?" "Yes." Gong Sun Lanji did not expect him to be so direct, and was stunned for a moment. Yang Fan said with a sullen face, "Willfulness is not likable. Willfulness and ignorance, that is especially annoying." Yang Fan's words were a little harsh, and Gong Sun Lanji's face turned red and white. Anu was a little uneasy, and gently pulled the corner of his clothes. It was easier for men to tolerate beautiful women, and Yang Fan's character had always been more easygoing. Anu did not understand why Yang Fan was so harsh to Gongsun Lanji today. She was not only a beautiful woman, but also Xiaoman Shiji. Yang Fan naturally had his reasons for being like this. If Miss Gongsuin's skills were far inferior to his, and he suddenly pulled out his saber to counterattack, it was inevitable that Miss Gongsun would be injured. If Miss Gongsuin's skills were better than his, and he dodged in a fluster, such a sword strike might not be able to avoid hurting him. No matter what happened, the result would be a tragedy. He came to see his wife and child, not to become a cripple or cripple others. This sword strike to Miss Gongsun may have been a casual action, but Yang Fan was disgusted by it from the bottom of his heart. An all-out strike to test someone's martial arts? How mature was Yang Fan today? And with his status, would he be so bored that he would be interested in such a boring thing? Now it was Gongsun Lanji who did not know the gravity of the situation, and hoped that he would smile and praise Miss Gongsuin's excellent swordsmanship, and everyone would laugh. Good for you, good for me? What a joke! Gongsun Lanji was ashamed by Yang Fan's scolding. She flew into a rage out of humiliation and raised her sword, saying, "Even if you are Xiaoman's husband, I will teach you a good lesson today. Yang Fan, raise your saber." Yang Fan stuck out his chest and looked at her from the corner of his eyes, saying lightly, "No time. Not interested. Boring." You. Miss Gongsuin's straight and beautiful nose was almost crooked from anger. "Lanji." Following a shout, a fat old man wearing a turban on his head and a light robe with a round collar walked over angrily. As he walked, he shouted loudly, "You stinky girl, you are really making me angry. You are getting more and more unruly. You even use a saber and a spear against a guest." The old man walked with vigor and strength, and his roar was full of energy. He did not look like he was about to die from anger at all. It was unknown if he had been roaring at his precious daughter since she was a child, but the old man's roar was not inferior to that of the smoky old man in the White Barbarian of Yaozhou. "Go back to your room and reflect. You are not allowed to eat dinner today." The old man's voice was like thunder, and it made Yang Fan's ears itch. After shouting at his daughter, the old man turned to Yang Fan and looked him up and down. He revealed a smiling expression. "You are Xiaoman's husband?" Yang Fan quickly cupped his hands and bowed. "Yes, I am." Yang Fan greets Uncle Gongsun. Good. The old man beamed with joy and said, "You are a good boy at first glance. Young and promising, with a steady temperament. Xiaoman is really lucky." The old man ignored his daughter and pulled Yang Fan. As he walked, he sighed, "Lanji, this child has been spoiled by me. Xiaoman, that girl, is clever and sensible. This old man has always regarded her as my own daughter. I only hate that she is not my own daughter." Seeing that Gongsun Bufan had accompanied the guest in, Anu didn't follow him any more. Instead, she returned to the small pavilion with the furious Miss Gongsun. Gongsun Lanji carried her sword and walked into the small pavilion in a hurry. The first thing she said was, "My father praised you for being more obedient than me again." The second sentence was, "Your Lang Jun is really good. He is a real man. He is much better than that dead man's head. I have already held a martial arts competition for a spouse, but he is still a coward." Miss Xiaoman looked at her eldest senior sister, who was more manly than a man. She could only smile bitterly. When Yang Fan walked into the living room, he found that there was already a guest here. Seeing that the host of the house accompanied Yang Fan in, the guest put down his teacup and slowly stood up with a smile. This person was about the same age as Yang Fan. He had handsome eyebrows and a refreshing smile. He wore a simple but elegant green robe with a spotless snow-white undershirt exposed at the collar. He gave people an unusually clean feeling. Gongsun Bufan said to Yang Fan with a smile, "Haha, come, let me introduce you. This nephew is my junior. His surname is Dugu, and his given name is Yu. His family has a good relationship with me, and he often visits my house. Dugu, This is the director of the Ministry of Justice. Dugu? Yang Fan's heart suddenly moved. Although this surname was not common, this uncommon Dugu clan had already produced 3 empresses. Although this Dugu in front of him might not be the Dugu clan that Yang Fan thought him to be, since he was in the old capital of Chang, and had contacts with Gongsun Bufan, who had a high status in Chang, and how could he be sure that he was not the Dugu? Chapter 570. Yang Fan could tell that his surname was extraordinary. Although the other party was just a commoner, he didn't dare to be careless. He quickly stepped forward and cupped his hands towards the young man, saying with a smile, "I'm Yang Fan. You and I are both juniors of Uncle Gongsun. Let's just be friends and don't talk about official positions." This Dugu Yu wasn't a pretentious person. He probably didn't take the title of a doctor to heart. He laughed heartily and did as Yang Fan said. In terms of age, although Dugu Yu looked as young as Yang Fan, he was 4 years older than Yang Fan. In this way, Yang Fan could call him elder brother. Dugu Yu had a close relationship with Gongsun Bufan's family. Yang Fan's visit today was just to pay his respects and didn't have anything private to talk about. Therefore, Gongsun Bufan didn't ask this nephew to leave. Yang Fan exchanged some pleasantries and thanked Gongsun Bufan for taking care of Xiaoman. Gongsun Bufan said, "Nephew must be very concerned about Xiaoman since you've come from afar. How can this old man pull you to talk nonsense? Nephew, go and see Xiaoman. Since you're here, you naturally have to stay in this old man's residence. We'll talk about it in detail later." Yang Fan quickly stood up and thanked him. Dugu Yu also stood up and smiled. "Dugu and Erling hit it off the first time we met. Now that we're still chatting, I'll hold a banquet to invite you again, and we'll have a good chat. What do you think?" "That's my wish. I don't dare to invite you." Yang Fan readily agreed and cupped his hands towards him with a smile. Only then did he go to see Xiaoman with the accompaniment of the Gongsun family members. Gongsun Bufan stroked his beard and glanced at Yang Fan's back. After he withdrew his gaze, he saw that Dugu Yu was still looking at Yang Fan's disappearing back with a slightly contemplative expression, and he couldn't help but snort coldly. "You brat, you never visit unless it's New Year. You've completely forgotten that I and your father are sworn brothers. I'm afraid you're not here to visit me for being so attentive today, right?" Dugu Yu hurriedly put on a wronged expression and said, "Uncle, you've really wronged your nephew. Your nephew sincerely came to visit you today. F***ck off." Gongsun Bufan scolded with a smile, but then he frowned and said, "I've watched Xiaoman grow up. Although she's not my daughter, I still regard her as my own. Yang Fan is her husband, so don't have any bad ideas about him." Dugu Yu hurriedly said, "Uncle is worrying too much. Dugu sincerely wants to befriend Erling. I definitely don't have any bad intentions." Gongsun Bufan looked at him suspiciously, but Dugu Yu faced him calmly. His eyes were crystal clear, like a stream that could see the bottom. Gongsun Bufan heaved a sigh of relief and said, "Even if you don't have any bad intentions, you're not allowed to mess around in my house. I'm very free and carefree, and I don't want to get involved in the dog-eat-dog affairs of your noble families." Dugu Yu smiled apologetically and said, "I'll naturally follow Uncle's instructions." Xiaoman was still in the gazebo. When Yang Fan walked in, Anu pulled Gongsun Lanji away. Gongsun Lanji was obviously still somewhat unhappy with Yang Fan's previous rebuttal, but she was still very considerate towards this junior sister of hers. In front of her junior sister, she didn't want to argue with her husband again. She only used her pair of heroic big eyes to fiercely glare at this overbearing brother-in-law who didn't give her face, and then strode away with a pair of long legs like a tiger. When Xiaoman saw Yang Fan walking over, there was no one else in her eyes, and she immediately greeted him happily. Yang Fan saw that she had a big belly and walked so fast, but he was very worried. He hurriedly stepped forward and held her waist with one hand and stroked her towering belly with the other. He was full of joy when he felt that his life was connected with Xiaoman's. Xiao Man was helped into the gazebo by Lang Jun and sat down. Seeing his careful and abnormally happy look, the joy of seeing her husband turned into happiness and satisfaction, as well as a kind of motherly gentleness and pride. I knew that Lang Jun would definitely come back before the child is born. These 2 days, the child has been very noisy, punching and kicking all day long. He probably knows that his father is coming back soon. Xiao Man snuggled into Yang Fan's arms and said sweetly. Yang Fan hugged her, looked at her smiling face, and listened to her whispers. His heart was abnormally satisfied and peaceful. There was a wind blowing in the gazebo, but Yang Fan's mind was completely immersed in his beloved wife and the child that was about to be born. As soon as Xiao Man saw Yang Fan, she talked incessantly, and she said a lot. She said that Anu was defeated by senior sister Gongsun in a sword competition. She was not convinced, so she challenged senior sister again and again. She was defeated again and again, and she had completely given up these 2 days. She was no longer interested in competing with senior sister. However, senior sister was interested in fighting. If it was not for this, she would not have been itching to fight with Lang Jun just now. She said that Mr. Gongsun and Auntie Pei saw that she already had a child, while her Shiji, the couple's only precious daughter, Gongsun Lanji, was still living alone in her boudoir. The old couple were both envious and anxious, scolding her Shiji all day long. Her Shiji had no choice but to hold a martial arts competition to find a spouse, to retaliate against her parents. Xiao Man wanted to laugh every time she talked about it, and she wanted to share this happiness with Lang Jun. Of course, what she talked about the most was the child in her belly. Although the child had not been born yet, and she did not know what the child looked like, nor had she heard the child call her mother, and the little fellow in her belly could not be too naughty, she was able to talk about many things about the child with great familiarity. She said so much, but she did not mention her longing for Yang Fan. When love is strong, it becomes thin. When love is strong, it penetrates into every aspect of life. It is no longer the passion like a rose, but the light and pleasant like a winter sweet. It is no longer the vows of love under the moonlight, but the ordinary dribs and drabs. It is no longer vigorous, but it stays together forever. At this time, if you want to tell it in words, you will feel like you have forgotten what to say. Yang Fan listened with a smile. He had never been so patient. When Xiao Man finished expressing all the joy in her heart and leaned into his arms, he whispered in her ear, "It's been hard on you. This time I won't leave. I will stay here until you give birth to the child." Xiao Man had already heard about Yang Fan's plan before coming to Chang. Although she was reluctant, she agreed. However, the closer it was to the birth of the child, the softer her heart became. She had already agreed to something, but now she was regretting it. She held a glimmer of hope and said eagerly, "Lang Jun, I want to go back to Luoyang with you. When the child is born, I will not be afraid of the bumpy road." Yang Fan hugged her tighter and said softly, "You stay here. I can do whatever I want in Luoyang. This time, I am going to make things difficult for young Master Jiang. If I don't drive him away, it will be like there is a sharp knife hanging over our heads. I will not allow my family to live in such a situation. I did not allow it in the past, and now that we are about to have our own child, I will not allow it." Yang Fan gently stroked her hair. It seemed like a promise and a vow. He said word by word, "I want you to be with me, happy and peaceful, and grow old together. I want our child to grow up happily, marry a wife, have children, and live a peaceful life." "Yes." Xiao Man bit her lip and answered in a low voice. She leaned against his chest, tears welling up in her eyes, but she did not say anything else. After a while, Xiao Man seemed to have thought of something. She suddenly broke into laughter, raised her head, sniffed, and said, "Marry a wife and have children? Lang Jun, you are so far-sighted. Are you so sure that I will give birth to a boy?" "Yes, it could also be a girl. If it is a girl." Yang Fan suddenly frowned. Xiao Man immediately became nervous and said hesitantly, "Lang Jun, you don't like girls?" Yang Fan shook his head and said, "I like it. Of course I like it. It is my own flesh and blood. Why wouldn't I like it? Then Yang Fan said with a serious expression, I suddenly thought of something. Xiaoman, if we give birth to a girl, you must remember not to teach her martial arts. Xiaoman asked curiously, why? Yang Fan said worriedly, she's a girl, so she should act like a girl. Let her wield a spear and a stick. Once she becomes a girl like your senior sister, I won't be worried to death. Xiaoman couldn't help but burst out laughing. That's not it. Although senior sister has a straightforward temperament, she's not usually so rash. This time it is because, hey, she refused to say, and I am not very clear. I know something. It seems that she likes a man, but that man always avoids her. So she used this method to provoke that man to show up. Xiaoman said with a smile, Anu and I are both martial arts practitioners. Who is arrogant and domineering? Yang Fan smiled in relief and said, That's true. I thought too much. Yang Fan knew that Miss Gong's son had another purpose for this martial arts competition. Although he still did not have a good impression of her, he did not have his guard up. Otherwise, Yang Fan would have to consider taking Xiaoman away and settling her somewhere else just because she put her marriage through such a ridiculous method. This Miss Gong's son was too unreliable. She was so irresponsible to herself. Yang Fan was worried that she would lead his obedient little Nuno astray. When he thought of other arrangements, Yang Fan thought of his only acquaintance in Chang, and he couldn't help but ask, Oh yes, after you arrived in Chang, and did Shenmu send anyone to see you? Xiaoman nodded and said yes. He sent someone to see me, but seeing that I am safe here, he reduced the number of visits. But every once in a while, someone will come to visit. Oh, did you know that Shenmu is not in Chang'an now? Yang Fan said, I just arrived today and came to see you immediately. I have not contacted him. Where did he go if he is not in Chang? And did he go to the western region again? Xiaoman shook her head and said, Not the western region. This time it is even further. He went to Xinluo. Yang Fan was surprised and said, What is he doing there? Xiaoman said, The people he sent were all so vague. They only explained it to me because Shenmu didn't show up. It is probably because Shenmu did something that was too big and alarmed the elders, so he was punished. He was ordered to do something in Xinluo as a punishment. Yang Fan made an oh sound and thought to himself, This matter is probably referring to the fight between him and young Master Jiang during the battle in Chang, and the two of them manipulated the price of grain. Sometimes a bucket of rice in Guangzhou was worth 1,000 coins, and sometimes it was as cheap as dirt. Even the imperial court was alarmed. Young Master Jiang lost the battle and gave up Chang, and An left Luoyang in defeat. Although Shenmu won a great victory, this matter was too big. It is impossible for those aristocratic families to be indifferent. Thinking of this, Yang Fan suddenly remembered that when he was in the Miao stockade village, Lin Zixiong, who came to meet him disguised as a traveling merchant, had said that if he went to Chang, and there might be some elders who wanted to see him. Yang Fan's heart suddenly moved, and he thought to himself, could it be that the open and secret battle between the obvious sect and the hidden sect made those old fellows living in seclusion feel that the juniors are not reliable and can't control themselves from coming out? Chapter 571. It was a beautiful and elegant garden with rockeries and curved corridors. It was different from Princess Taiping's mansion, which was full of wild interest. Here, even a blade of grass had traces of being chiseled. Every place was arranged with ingenuity and was arranged in an orderly manner. The hall was very spacious, but because there was only one table, it seemed very spacious. Behind the table sat a man in his 30s, wearing a soft robe. His appearance was ordinary, but his eyes were sharp and full of spirit. He wore a tall hat and a broad robe. Sitting behind the table, he had some charm of the Han and Jin dynasties. In front of him, the long table was filled with condiments and food, sauce, garlic, mustard, pepper, coriander, chives, onion, ginger, and other spices in small plates. There were also deer tendons, sheep's neck, chicken tongue, shrimp, camel's hump, beef, mushrooms, and other various kinds of food, cut into pieces like flower petals. In the middle of the table, there was a simple copper hot pot that looked like a bronze cauldron. The water in the pot was boiling and steaming. A beautiful girl wearing a plain, narrow sleeve dress with a short skirt around her waist was kneeling on one side of the table. She was leaning over the table, and her pair of delicate, flower-like hands were methodically throwing seasonings into the boiling water. She then used a pair of ivory hands to pick up a piece of venison and rinsed it in the boiling water. She then dipped it in the sauce and put it into a small orchid plate that was as thin as a cicada's wing. She then brought it to the master with both hands, her movements extremely elegant. The man, wearing a tall hat and a broad belt, did not look at the fragrant food she handed to him. Instead, he slightly tilted his shoulder and supported his chin with one hand, listening to a man who was standing in the hall. Yang Fan has arrived in Chang'an. He first went to visit Princess Taiping and then separated from the main group and went to Gongsun Mansion alone. Gongsun Mansion? Is it Gongsun Bufan's home? Yes. The man, wearing a tall hat and a broad belt, picked up the piece of venison and put it into his mouth. He chewed it carefully and swallowed it. Then he slowly asked, "What is his relationship with the Gongsun family?" The man answered, "Yang Fan's wife used to be a maid in Gongsun Mansion when she was young. But because she and Miss Gongsun were like sisters, Gongsun Bufan also regarded her as his own. Now that she was pregnant, she was sent back to Chang and moved into the Gongsun Mansion." Yang Fan went to visit his wife. The young master sneered, "Yang Fan, since he's here in Chang and he shouldn't leave." The man, who was slightly bowing, asked hesitantly, "Isn't the first young master going to return to Chang, and secretly in the near future? Should we discuss this with the first young master first? After all, he's an official of the imperial court." That young master glanced at him and sneered, "He's just a minister of justice. As long as he dies flawlessly, what problems can there be? Don't tell me that I can't make the decision on this matter." The man's expression changed, and he didn't dare to say anything else. He quickly bowed and said, "Yes." Yang Fan. The man with the tall hat and wide belt put down his ivory chopsticks, his face full of resentment. "If it weren't for you, how could my big brother be defeated so easily? This time, since you've come to Chang, and I'll make sure you won't be able to leave." He slowly raised his eyes and said coldly, "Go and make the arrangements. I want to hear the news of his death as soon as possible." The man didn't say anything else. He just bowed deeply and quietly left. The young master with the tall hat sent the man away and focused on eating. He ate very carefully, chewing slowly as if he was writing. He was very patient and focused, and he didn't speak during the process of eating. The little handmaiden at the side boiled the fresh meat, dipped it in the sauce, and handed it to him. Ordinary people would probably feel impatient eating like this, but this young master seemed to be used to eating like this. Moreover, he didn't eat very fast, so the process of the handmaiden boiling the meat and dipping the sauce was very leisurely. At this time, another person was brought into the hall. So, the young master put down his chopsticks again. He didn't have the habit of eating while talking. This was a guest. Strictly speaking, he wasn't a guest, but a businessman. This businessman only sold one thing, and that was people. He was a slave trader, the biggest slave trader in Chang and Long Fei. Long Fei's body wasn't big, and he was even a little weak. He always had a humble smile on his face, but everyone knew his fierceness. To become one of the top slave traders in Chang, and without any real ability, how could he keep his underlings under control? But now the humble expression on his face was from the bottom of his heart, because the young master sitting in front of him was surnamed Liu, and his family was in Fanyang. This was a real descendant of an aristocratic family, a person with great power. In front of this noble young master, Long Fei didn't even have the qualification to lick his toes. Long Fei smiled before saying anything, and humbly bowed to young Master Lu. Long Fei had a rich source of slaves, whether it was the horse bandits on the grassland of the western region, or the pirates of the East Sea and the South Sea. They all had a close relationship with him. Therefore, Turkic and Tubo prisoners of war, Persian ruined nobles, Korean and Silla girls, Dai people from the south, and Kuinhua slaves were all able to flow into his hands continuously. Long Fei's slaves had never been Tangs, because it was illegal to sell domestic civilians. The risk was too high, and the loss outweighed the gain. These foreign race slaves were also very popular among the aristocratic families. So Long Fei was a legal slave trader, and thus became the most popular businessman in the aristocratic families. That was why he could have a place in front of young Master Lu. But since Long Fei stood there, he refused to move a step, as if he was afraid of stepping on the hall. He cheered himself up and began to brag to this young Master Lu. The man in front of him was the son of the first wife of the Lu family in Fanyang, and one of his biggest buyers. Young Master Lu, this lowly one, has 300 young girls from Goryeo and Silla that have just arrived. They're beautiful and gentle, and all of them are good at singing and dancing. They're the best choices to be personal maids, concubines, or musicians and dancers. In addition, there are 500 Kunlun slaves, all of them gentle and hardworking, and 9 of them are excellent swimmers. Last year, young Master was careless and lost to young Master Chui in the game of searching for pearls in the water. As long as young Master chooses any one of these 9, I believe that none of the other young masters will be able to beat young Master. Searching for pearls in the water was a game played by young masters. They would casually throw pearls worth thousands of gold into the river, and then let their servants, who were good swimmers, enter the water to search for the pearls. The first servant to fish out the pearls would be the winner. If they were slow or couldn't find the pearls at all, they would naturally lose. Just now, when he mentioned the 300 Silla slaves and Goryeo slave girls, young Master Lu was still a little lazy and dispirited. But when he heard that he had Kunlun slaves who were exceptionally good at swimming, young Master Lu's interest was aroused. Good! I want all 9 of them. Long Fei was startled and said, Young Master, searching for pearls in the water. It's enough to have 1 or 2 people who are good swimmers. Why? Young Master Lu glared at him and said, If Chui Fong and the others by the other Kunlun slaves are good swimmers, how can I guarantee that I will win? I want all of these people who are good swimmers. Only then will it be foolproof. Lu Gongzi sat up straight, picked up the piece of braised venison, chewed it carefully, and swallowed it slowly. He took a sip of wine and waited until the food was completely swallowed before he said, My Zumu Darren's birthday is coming. Pick 100 of the best women from Silla and Goryeo. I want to send them to serve Zomo. Long Fei said repeatedly, Yes, yes, yes. Young Master, do you want to see for yourself? Young Master Lu waved his hand and said, No need. It's not the first time I'm dealing with you. I trust your eyes. Other than the 9 who are good swimmers, choose another 50 young and strong Kunlun slaves. Yes, yes, yes. Tomorrow. Young Master Lu said excitedly, Bring the 9 Kunlun slaves to Chu River. I want to see their abilities for myself. It was already late autumn. When they woke up early in the morning, there would be a layer of frost on the grass. The maple leaves on the mountain had already turned deep red. The water of Chu River had also started to turn cold. The Kunlun slaves came from the south and were not used to the cold river water. However, he wanted to see the swimming ability of the Kunlun slaves in this season. Those people could only jump into the river and look for a pearl in the mud at the bottom of the river. If their swimming ability is really amazing, I must find Xiao Chui and the others and compete with them again. Young Master Lu slapped his thigh and said excitedly, Last time, I lost my beloved Persian princess to him. This time, I want to win over his most beloved concubine and take revenge for this arrow. Long Fei smiled and flattered. Young Master, you will definitely get what you want. Young Master, Lu laughed out loud. In his eyes, killing a fifth-rank official of the imperial court was far less important than a game of throwing a pearl into the water. Yang Fan stayed in Gongsun Mansion. Gongsun Bufan was a very hearty and hospitable fat old man. After a short period of interaction, Yang Fan found out that Miss Gongsun Lanji's manly personality that her father detested was actually inherited from this old Mr. Gongsun himself. However, when this kind of personality appeared in a man, it made people feel much more comfortable. Therefore, he got along very well with old Mr. Gongsun. Aunt Pei was born in the Pei clan. Although her sword skills were amazing, in the eyes of ordinary people, she was just a graceful and noble woman. Auntie Pei hadn't been out for many years, and she looked more like a kind and benevolent old woman. Nowadays, Aunt Pei worshipped Buddhism. The thing she most often did was to knock wooden fish in her family's temple. Therefore, Yang Fan had only seen her once and never had the chance to see her again. The days in Gongsun Mansion were plain and warm. In the early morning, when Yang Fan accompanied Xiao Man for a walk in the garden, Miss Gongsun was practicing her sword in the forest. When Yang Fan accompanied Xiao Man and An Nu for breakfast, Miss Gongsun was still practicing her sword. When the sun rose and Yang Fan was ready to go out to pay a visit to the Chang and prefectural magistrate Lu Qiantian, Miss Gongsun was still practicing her sword. Yang Fan was moved. If a person could be so focused on one thing, even if his talent was average, his achievements would definitely be extraordinary. Moreover, Miss Gongsun did not seem to be a stupid person, and her teacher was not mediocre either. According to Xiao Man, Anu and Miss Gongsun had been defeated in many battles. Now that Miss Gongsun was practicing so hard, if they really fought, he might not be her match. The teachers showed the way, but the cultivation depended on the individual. Yang Fan had too many things to do. The time he spent on martial arts was far less than that of Miss Gongsun. Yang Fan originally wanted to find time to compete with Miss Gongsun in sword skills. After all, she was Xiao Man's senior sister. It would not be good to make things awkward between them. By competing in martial arts, he might be able to ease their relationship. But now that he saw Miss Gongsun's craziness in sword practice, this idea had long disappeared. He did not want to compete with a female sword maniac. His wife and wife-to-be were watching. If he won, it would be an unfair victory. If he lost, it would be very embarrassing. Chapter 572. Sun Yuxuan, Hu Yuanli, and Ma Qiao knew that Yang Fan's time with his family was limited, so they did not disturb him. The three of them had different preferences, so they did not get together. Instead, they traveled around Chang and city according to their own interests. Hu Yuanli went to the Chang, an academy where there were a few rare copies. He had been famous for a long time, so he took the opportunity to copy them. Sun Yuxuan took his sister Fei on a sightseeing tour. Although Fei was obviously more interested in shopping, she had to pretend to be gentle in front of her lover. Sun Yuxuan did not realize that Fei was actually a shopaholic. Ma Qiao, on the other hand, went to the north and bought a lot of things that his mother and wife would like. Of course, he also prepared some things for the baby. Although he did not know whether the baby was a boy or a girl, the things that babies used were similar, such as a tiger skin coat, a tiger head hat, and a rattle drum. Chang used to be the capital of the Tang dynasty, and now it was the capital of the Zhou dynasty. It was not a small place. As the Chang and magistrate, he naturally had connections and supporters in the court. Therefore, Lu Guotian was well aware of Yang Fan's reputation and status in Luoyang. He knew that this young minister of justice was now the vanguard of the court against the censorate. Yang Fan had always been very low-key. Other than when he was fighting with the censors, he always gave people the feeling that he was idle. He had never revealed any strong power or background. He seemed like a hothead who was willing to be cut into pieces. However, Lu Qiantian did not see it that way. Although the censorate was not as powerful as it used to be, they still managed to topple the three ministers of the Political Affairs Hall. Su Weiwei, Cui Yuanzong, and Zhang she had all been officials for many years, and all of them had their own connections and connections. They also had the support of Mr. Li, who was second only to one, but above all others. How could they not be toppled so easily? Although the imperial censorate seemed to be in a precarious situation, didn't this trip to the south still turn the world upside down and shock the entire court? It was such a terrifying place, but Yang Fan chose to openly oppose them, and yet he remained unscathed. How could he not have the support of a powerful force? If Lu Guitian believed that it was Yang Fan's luck, he would not be where he was today. Therefore, he was very polite to Yang Fan and immediately prepared a banquet to entertain him. The banquet did not end until the afternoon. It was hard to refuse such hospitality, and there were many officials drinking with him. Even if they only drank 1 cup each, Yang Fan was still drunk when he left. After leaving Lu Xuantian's residence, Yang Fan galloped leisurely on the reins of the horse. Originally, he just wanted to relax and enjoy the scenery of Chang'an. Who knew that he would arrive at Yongkang Lane unknowingly? By the time he realized it, the horse had already arrived at the front of Princess Taiping's residence. Not sure if it had been here before, it actually found this place again. Yang Fan couldn't help laughing. He turned over and got off the horse. Just when he was hesitating whether he should pay a visit or not, the door of the princess's mansion suddenly opened. A group of attendants in bright clothes and on horses came out, escorting a carriage. Diu as a cover, white bronze calf ornaments, blue and green curtains, cinnabar wrapped in oil. These were the official ceremonial armaments of the princess when she went out. Yang Fan was slightly surprised. Since he saw that the princess was on her way, he had the intention to leave. Unexpectedly, Princess Taiping's carriage had not yet been rolled up, and she had already seen her Langjun leaning on the horse. Princess Taiping's face immediately revealed a happy expression. She gave an order, and a maidservant dressed in green leisurely walked over and bowed to Yang Fan. She softly said, "Your Highness, please come forward and meet the doctor." Yang Fan hesitated for a moment and then confidently walked over. Princess Taiping was sitting in the middle of the seat, but this time she moved to the side and smiled at him. Yang Fan understood. After he boarded the carriage, the green-clothed maidservant who followed him put down the curtain, and the carriage slowly moved forward. "At least you have a conscience, coming to see me so soon." Taiping smiled sweetly, gently placed her delicate head on Yang Fan's shoulder, hugged his arm, and sighed contentedly. "Today I visited the magistrate of Chang and local government and was entertained by him. After drinking some wine, I wandered on horseback and unconsciously came here," Yang Fan casually replied. He placed her smooth and soft little hand in his palm and gently caressed it. He asked, "You've always liked to travel light and wear men's clothes when you go out, just for the sake of being light and refreshing. But today, you're dressed up in grand attire and full of honor. Where are you going?" Princess Taiping raised her head and said with a smile, "I was invited to attend the banquet. Those families all pay attention to the rules. If I am too casual, it will be a kind of contempt for them. I have no choice." Yang Fan was surprised and said, "What family?" "Even you have to pay attention to them." Princess Taiping said with a smile, "A friend of mine since childhood. Her name is Ning Ku, and she is from the Dugu family." Dugu. Yang Fan's heart suddenly skipped a beat. This rare surname seemed to appear too frequently in his ears recently, since this Dugu Ning Ku, whom Princess Taiping mentioned, had played with her since childhood. Their age and identity should be similar. Then she must be from the Dugu family, which had 3 empresses in the northern Zhou dynasty, the Great Sui dynasty, and the Tang dynasty. But he didn't know whether this Miss Dugu was related to the Duguyu he met yesterday. He also didn't know whether this Duguyu really hit it off at first sight or had other purposes. Yang Fan secretly raised his vigilance. Since Princess Taiping was going to attend the banquet, it was not appropriate for Yang Fan to spend too much time with her. So Yang Fan quickly explained his plan. "Princess, Could you stay in Chang'an for a few more days? Xiao Meng's due date is coming, but the specific date is still uncertain. I can't stay with the baby for 1 month or 100 days, but I have to stay with him for a few more days. Well, Taiping's voice was a little uncertain and erratic. Yang Fan looked at her strangely. Taiping looked hesitant and somewhat indecisive. Yang Fan couldn't help asking, "What's wrong?" Princess Taiping said, "I originally planned to attend Ning's banquet today, deal with other things tomorrow, and set off for Luoyang the day after tomorrow." Yang Fan said in surprise, "So soon?" Taiping grunted disappointedly and was not in high spirits. Obviously, she also wanted to stay with Yang Fan in Chang, and for a few days. Yang Fan frowned deeply and said, "Xiao Meng hasn't given birth yet. What should we do?" Taiping sighed softly and held his hand, saying, "It happened in a hurry. Otherwise, I would like to stay here for a few more days. But something happened in the capital city." Princess Taiping briefly told Yang Fan what had happened and her plan. Only then did Yang Fan understand that all the changes were caused by what he had done in the south. Taiping said, "You also know that my 2 royal brothers are closely watched by the mother and dare not make any moves. If we want to keep the descendants of Li Tang, we have to accumulate strength as soon as possible. For a long time, the Wu family has been far more powerful than me. I can only quietly accumulate some strength and make some connections. If I lose this opportunity, the gap between my strength and theirs will be even greater." And Taiping's curved and thin black eyebrows gently frowned, like a crescent moon covered with a thin layer of worry. "Unfortunately, you are right. I presented Zhang Changzong and Mother, and used Zhang Changzong's words to dispel Mother's idea of deposing the crown prince. However, after Mother's favor, the Zhang brothers also grew ambitious. They are not yet mature, but it is hard to say if they continue like this. I am in a hurry to return to the capital because I want to stop them from seizing more power through this matter. Otherwise, before the Wu family's disaster is solved, the Zhang family's disaster will rise again. Our Li family is like a candle in the wind. We can't withstand this wave of torment." Yang Fan gritted his teeth and said, "Fine. I will escort you back to the capital. Xiao Man is reasonable and will not blame me. As for my son," Yang Fan laughed and said, "A newborn baby doesn't know anything. I am guarding in front of him because I know him. He doesn't know me, so it is fine to see him again in a few days. Isn't the reason I'm working so hard today so that he can live a peaceful and healthy life after he's born? No, I am returning to Luoyang for the Li family's empire. You are staying for your own flesh and blood. This is your first child. If I ask you to accompany me back to the capital, it is too unreasonable. Even if you don't say anything, Xiao Man will blame me. Moreover, all the forces are competing. One careless mistake will lead to death. If you are involved, it will not be a good thing." Princess Taiping stared at Yang Fan and said softly, "I will go back. You stay." Yang Fan frowned and said, "I am not going back to Luoyang but to Chang'an. I am originally going to escort you back to Luoyang. If you leave and I stay, how can I explain to the emperor?" Princess Taiping tilted her head and smiled at him mischievously. "You are so stupid. If you are sick, the emperor can't let you go in sickness, can he?" Yang Fan was silent for a moment, then smiled bitterly and said, "Then I have to do this. Fan, I also want to stay in Chang'an to accompany you. Now I have no choice. You don't blame me. Taiping is not because of power." Princess Taiping leaned on his shoulder and gently held his arm. She was reluctant to part with him, but she was somewhat apprehensive. Yang Fan gently patted her back and said in a soft voice, "The Li family can only rely on you now. I understand. So how can I blame you? Do what you have to do. This is what I wanted to do, right?" "Yes." Princess Taiping replied in a low voice. Her eyes suddenly turned red. She raised her charming face and suddenly put her soft arms around Yang Fan's neck. Then She moved her plump and alluring lips to his. The ox cart continued to move forward. It turned out that the Dugu family's mansion was also in the Chongren Square. Yang Fan got out of Princess Taiping's carriage and changed to his own horse. He looked at the princess's carriage as it continued to move forward. Then he turned around and went to Gongsun Bufon's mansion. Yang Fan returned to Xiao Man's residence. Xiao Man and Anu were sitting in the pavilion with a man in military attire. They were talking. He looked carefully and discovered that it was Ma Qiao. The two women stood up when they saw that Yang Fan had arrived. They excused themselves to Ma Qiao. Then Anu helped Xiao Man back to their room to rest. Yang Fan looked at the tiger skin clothes and tiger head hats on the stone table. He couldn't help but smile. "Did you buy these for your child?" Ma Qiao replied with a smile, "I bought 2 sets. These children's clothes don't discriminate between men and women. They can be worn by any child. They aren't expensive things, but they are a token of my appreciation as an uncle." Yang Fan sat down and picked up the small clothes. They weren't big. They weren't much bigger than his palm. Yang Fan couldn't help but have a wonderful feeling in his heart when he thought that the child was about to be born. Yang Fan's face unconsciously brimmed with a smile as he thought of his child wearing these clothes and lying in his arms. Yang Fan suddenly remembered Princess Taiping's decision after playing with them for a while. He quickly put down the things and said to Ma Qiao, "That's right. Sister-in-law is about to give birth. I'm afraid you're anxious to return home. But you don't need to worry too much. The princess will leave for Luoyang the day after tomorrow. So you can buy whatever you want as soon as possible tomorrow." "So soon?" Ma Qiao was surprised and asked, "Then what about Xiao Man?" Yang Fan replied, "I'll stay. You guys go." He told the whole story. Ma Qiao nodded with a strange expression on his face. Yang Fan asked curiously, "What's wrong?" Ma Qiao hesitated for a moment, but still said what he felt in his heart. "I always feel that a woman should support her husband and teach her children and live a peaceful life. It's not a woman's place to meddle in national affairs. This world belongs to men. If a woman meddles in it, even if it's a good intention, it will turn into a bad thing." Yang Fan was silent for a while, and then said, "She's not just a woman. She's also a princess of the Tang dynasty." When Emperor Gaozu raised his troops in Taiyuan, the 3 most outstanding children were Crown Prince Li Jianqing, Prince Qin Li Shimin, and Princess Pingyang. The princesses of the Tang dynasty never felt that they didn't need to care about national affairs because they were women. It's true that many of them did a lot of shameful things in order to seize power, but at least what Princess Taiping is doing now is good for the future of the Tang dynasty. I don't know what the Prince of Luling and Fangzhou is like, but you and I are clear about the crown prince in the palace. The world must be surnamed Wu." Ma Qiao shook his head and then nodded. He agreed with what Yang Fan said, but he still instinctively resisted women's participation in politics, which was also the opinion of most Tangs. Wu Zetian had been the emperor for so many years, but she was still jittery, and her face changed when she heard of a conspiracy. It was precisely because of this reason. This world belongs to men. Yang Fan sighed and said, "At this time, if no one from the royal family stands up to win people's hearts, and only rely on the ministers to rack their brains, the Li family won't have a chance. I only hope that Taiping can do this. When she gets more power, she won't be blinded by power and become the second Wu Zetian." At this time, a member of the Gongsun family came, stood outside the pavilion, and bowed to Yang Fan from a distance. Yang Fan got up and said, "What's the matter?" The member of the Gongsun family answered in a clear voice, "Young Master Dugu invites Yang Longzhong to have a banquet at Chuzhong's hibiscus garden at midnight tomorrow. This is the invitation." Chapter 573. The Chu River was located in the Xingping Square in the southeast of Chang and City. The pleasure garden in the Xingping Square was the highest in Chang and City. Standing on it, one could have a panoramic view of Chang and City, which was as neat as a chessboard. The southern side of the pleasure garden was at a very low elevation. There were ripples and a long stream of water, which was the Chu River. On both sides of the Chu River, the willows were like clouds and the figures of people. It was a prosperous place in Chang, and every year on the 3rd day of the 3rd month and on the 15th day of the 7th month, rich and powerful people would gather here to feast and meet friends. There was a saying, "The weather is fresh on the 3rd day of the 3rd month, and there are many beauties by the waterside of Chang." It was the first time for Yang Fan to come to this place. When he arrived at the Chu River, he saw flowers and plants around the lake. The water was bright and beautiful, the shore was winding, and there were several small boats in the blue waves. Lotus and calamus grew by the side of the lake. Pavilions and palaces were hidden among the flowers and trees. The willows and the sky were bright and beautiful. Yang Fan was not familiar with the road, so he came out much earlier than the agreed time. Now that he saw the beautiful scenery here, he could not help but be interested in sightseeing. He dismounted from the horse, held the reins, and leisurely walked along the winding shore of the lake. It was late autumn, and there were not many tourists in the Chu River. It was a quiet cave, and it was a good time to calm down and enjoy the scenery. In late autumn, the lotus flowers gradually thinned, and many lotus leaves gradually withered. However, the lotus heads grew strong, and the slender stems supported a bulging lotus head. They stretched their necks among the dark green lotus leaves and looked around, as if they were children curiously looking at the passers-by on the shore. Behind Yang Fan, there were 2 people leading the horses who were also strolling around the Chu River. There was no one else besides them. The lush lotus leaves were densely packed together, and the wind could only stir them slightly. In the midst of the green waves, there was an occasional hint of red, but it was a hibiscus that had just bloomed. The pink and tender dimples that had just bloomed were like a slim and graceful girl that was peeking out from the green lotus leaves and peeking at the passers-by on the shore. Another gust of wind blew, and the shy lotus girl hurriedly pulled a green leaf over to cover her blushing face, blocking Yang Fan's gaze. Yang Fan smiled as he glanced at the lotus flower hidden under the lotus leaf, and then glanced at the 2 people leading the horse far behind him. 2 horse handlers were standing facing the lotus in the pond, pointing and shaking their heads as if they were reciting a poem. Yang Fan turned around and continued to walk forward slowly. The 2 reins seemed to be led by an invisible rein and followed him step by step. A small knife spun deftly in Xiaoman's hand. The pear slices were spun by her in circles, still sticking to the pear. Her technique was extremely nimble. Anu and Gong Sun Lanji were sitting next to him, and they were bickering again. Gong Sun Lanji bewitchingly said, "It doesn't matter if your skills are not as good as others, but if you don't have the courage to fight, then there will be no progress to speak of. How about it? The autumn air is refreshing. You and I have nothing to do. Do you want to have another spar?" Anu snorted and said, "You are happy to be abused by you, but I am not happy. Your swordsmanship is outstanding, and I am no match for you. But what I am best at is not swordsmanship, so why should I give up my strong points and take advantage of my weak points to compete with you? Then what are you good at? Killing. Killing people by any means possible. It sounds amazing. Of course." Anu's little Yao nose proudly raised. "I am not as good as you in sword fighting, but if it is a real life and death fight, I can kill you." Gong Sun Lanji's eyes lit up. "Why don't we try?" Anu shook her head. "We can't try. The skill of killing can only be used to kill people. I don't want to kill you." Gong Sun Lanji glanced at her and sneered, pretending to be dismissive. "You're blowing your trumpet." Anu was not provoked by her and said, "Believe it or not, anyway, I don't want to fight with you anymore." Gong Sun Lanji rolled her eyes and suddenly said with a cheeky smile, "I think Yang Fan seems to be very powerful. Why don't you talk to him and let him have a spar with me?" Anu said with a straight face, "No." Gong Sun Lanji stared at her and said, "Why? Are you afraid that he will lose?" Anu sighed and said, I am afraid that you will lose. Gong's son Lanji stared and did not speak. Anu said, Every inch of land in Loyang is expensive. The house bought by the Yang family is really not big. It can't squeeze so many sisters. Xiaoman could not help but smile and smooth things over. Okay, I really don't know if the two of you are enemies in a previous life, fighting swords as soon as you meet, and now you are bickering here. Eat a pear. Xiaoman grabbed the head of the pear skin and pulled it like pulling a long snake, revealing the crystal white pear flesh. Xiaoman threw away the pear skin, cut the middle with the knife, and 2 pear petals fell into the plate, half each not biased. Ever since Xiaoman became pregnant, her body had become much more plump than before. Now, even her face had become chubbier. Her originally pretty pointed chin was a little round, and her face was taut. When she smiled, she looked like a baby with some baby fat. She was very cute. Although Gong Sun Lanji and Anu liked to fight, they both liked her, especially to see her like this. Xiaoman smiled sweetly and adorably, and the two no longer bickered. Anu picked up half of the pear, and Gong Sun Lanji took the pear with one hand. Looking at her Shimmy's adorable appearance, her other hand couldn't help but pinch her firm cheeks, and said, Shimmy, you really have patience. When will my niece be born? I still need to teach her martial arts. Xiaoman's temper was very good now, and she corrected with a smile, Why must it be a niece? Can it be a nephew? Gong Sun Lanji said, What's so good about a nephew? When he grows up, he will be a stinky man. All men are not good things. At this time, a not good thing led another not good thing out of the small hall. The one in front was a small steward of the Gongsun family, and the one behind was an outsider looking at his attire who was also a servant of some family. First Lady of the Yang family, this person is here on the order of his master to send an invitation. He wants to see Yang Longzhong. When the steward of the Gongsun family said this, the person next to him smiled and slightly bowed. Greetings to the 3 ladies. Xiaoman said apologetically, My Langjun went to the Lotus Garden in Chu River to attend a banquet. He will not be back for a while. May I know your master's name? And if he can leave an invitation when my Langjun comes back, he will choose another day to visit. The person was surprised. Yang Longzhong went to the banquet. I don't remember Yang Longzhong has acquaintances in Chang'an. Please forgive this lowly one. But may I ask, who invited Yang Longzhong to the banquet? Gong Sun Lanji stared at him. You know it yourself. Why did you ask? The person who invited him to the banquet is from the Dugu family. What about it? The person's eyes flashed slightly and he smiled. Oh, so it is the Dugu family then. This lowly one will reply to the master. I will invite Yang Longzhong another day. Farewell. The person bowed to them, presented the invitation, and then turned to leave. Xiaoman opened the invitation, looked at the inscription, and asked doubtfully, Lin Zixiang? Anu, have you heard of this person? Anu curled her lips and said, That guy always likes to do things mysteriously. I don't know how many things he is hiding and refuses to let us know. Only God knows who this Lin Zixiang is. Xiaoman replied to her husband with a smile. If he doesn't say, it must be because he is afraid that we will worry about him. Why should Anu blame him for this? Gong Sun Lanji shivered and said in despair, To think that Xiaoman, who was so cute in the past, has become like this after getting married. If this is called an idle wife and a good mother, I would rather not marry. Tin'ano immediately said, Very good. If the person you love day and night comes, you must ignore him. Gong Sun Lanji glared. So what if I ignore him? Tin'ano raised his chin and said, I will despise you. Gong Sun Lanji said, I will despise you if you have the ability to compete with me. Xiaoman sighed in distress, holding up her originally sharp but now rounder cute chin, and said worriedly, Quarreling again. Can't you two stop for a moment? Yang Fan walked slowly because it was still early. He was not in a hurry, leisurely strolling along the lakeside of the crooked river. And suddenly on the road ahead he saw a vendor selling snacks. There were too few tourists in late autumn, and there was no business. The vendor was lazily leaning against a big rock by the river, dozing off with a straw hat on his face. Yang Fan walked over and poked his head into the cart and first smelled a sweet aroma. The food on the cart was covered with steaming cloth, and only a corner was lifted, revealing a section of red and white sparkling like jade. This was a famous snack in Guangzhou, also known as crystal dragon and phoenix cake. The color was fresh and moist, soft and sticky, sweet and fragrant. At this time, the autumn sun was reflected on the corner of the cake. The moist, white, glutinous rice, the bright red date paste, and the dark green raisins were sparkling under the sunlight, very appetizing. Yang Fan asked with a smile, "Hey, how much are you selling this sweet cake?" The vendor was leaning against a big rock, dozing off. When he heard business, he quickly put the straw hat on his head and eagerly jumped up and said with a smile, "Does the customer want to buy cake? This is good stuff, sweet and delicious. The taste is excellent, and the price is not expensive. You can buy a big piece for 2 copper coins." In the distance, the 2 men leading the horses saw that Yang Fan had stopped to buy cakes, and hurriedly stopped as well. One of them pointed to the lake, and the other nodded his head, pretending to waste time. Yang Fan bought a piece of cake, glanced at the 2 people, and walked away with a smile. 1 piece of cake, 1/3 for the person, 2/3 for the horse, and then washed his hands in the clear river water. Not far ahead, he saw a 7-story pagoda towering into the clouds. This was the big wild goose pagoda, which was built by Xuanzang after he returned from India. Inside, there were relics, Sanskrit scriptures, and many Buddhist treasures. Hibiscus Garden was south of the big wild goose pagoda, and when he saw the big wild goose pagoda, he also arrived at Hibiscus Garden. Chapter 574. The Hibiscus Garden was built on the water and filled with soil to form a continent. Buildings were built on top of the continent. From the shore to the top, it was about 10 feet long and was connected by a curved bridge. The bridge was paved with limestone, and on both sides were white marble railings with carvings of lions, tigers, and fierce beasts. The railings were only as high as an adult's waist, and on both sides was a river with lotus leaves growing in the water. Yang Fan tied his horse to a weeping willow tree by the riverside and strolled towards the head of the bridge. The continent was not small. At a glance, there were at least 5 or 6 red buildings and 7 or 8 pavilions. Yang Fan expected that Duguyu would not only entertain guests at one place, but booked the entire hibiscus garden. That was the behavior of a nouveau riche, not someone from an aristocratic family. However, Duguyu's invitation did not specify where he would be invited. Withdrawing his gaze, Yang Fan saw 2 servants in green robes and hats looking around at the head of the bridge. Yang Fan's heart stirred, and he walked forward, saying, "My surname is Yang Fan. I was invited by young Master Dugu to attend the banquet at the Hibiscus Garden." Were these 2 servants sent by Brother Dugu to welcome me? Ah, yes. Young Master came so early. The 2 servants hurriedly returned the greeting and happily said, "Please wait a moment, young Master. We will report to young Master to welcome you." Finished speaking, one of the servants turned around and ran away. When Yang Fan heard that they were sent by Duguyu to welcome him, he thought that they would lead him to the island and he would be fine. He did not expect them to be so serious and even invite the host to welcome him. He smiled and stopped walking, thinking to himself, "So strict with etiquette and rules. I'm afraid this Duguyu is really the family I guessed. But I don't know why he wants to befriend me. Could it be that the 2 people following behind me were sent by him?" Thinking of this, Yang Fan subconsciously looked back and saw that the 2 people leading the horse had disappeared without a trace. He could not help but be startled. If he was not sure that the 2 people had been following his every step, he would have suspected that he had seen wrongly. Yang Fan thought for a moment. Yet he didn't continue searching for the whereabouts of those 2 people. At this moment, as far as he was concerned, those 2 people were most likely sent by Duguyu. In this way, it caused him to be even more curious in his heart. What exactly did Duguyu intend to do all this? The river on both sides of the bridge was filled with lotus canals. The lotus leaves gradually withered, and the lotus pods stood out. Because this body of water was located on the sunny side, the lotus leaves were often illuminated by the sun. Among the withered lotus leaves, there were some white and some pink, but they were still blooming beautifully. Yang Fan suddenly discovered a small boat, quietly stopped in the middle of the lotus leaves. Because it did not move at all, Yang Fan had actually overlooked it. The boat was not big and looked like a canoe. It was pointed like a shuttle. At one end of the boat stood a barefooted boatwoman with rolled-up trousers and a bamboo hat on her head. She carried a long pole in her hand. On the other end sat a young girl in moon-white clothes. The young girl sat at the bow of the boat. The small boat was very shallow, and the bow was long and narrow. From afar, it looked like she was sitting in a lotus. Beside her, there was a twin lotus flower blooming. Her graceful figure, pink and delicate color, and that slender figure filled with spiritual energy complemented each other. It was as if the young girl was also a lotus flower that had just bloomed a white lotus. This scene was like a painting, and Yang Fan couldn't help but look at it attentively. A cool breeze blew gently. The lotus pod swayed slightly. The lotus pod swayed slightly. The water rippled slightly, and the long black hair of the young girl was also gently lifted. Only now did Yang Fan discover that the young girl did not tie her hair in a bun or tie it up. Her long hair was casually tied behind her with a white ribbon. The wind blew on the lake, but the young girl did not move. Although her beautiful hair was flying, she gave off a feeling of stillness. Extremely stillness. The young girl was looking into the distance. Her figure was a little lazy, and her expression was very peaceful. But Yang Fan had been watching her, and it seemed to have attracted her attention. She could not help but turn her head and look at Yang Fan. The distant mountains were dim, and the clear blue water was clear. The weeping willow tree beside her danced, and the boat on the water also seemed to be moving. But the young girl was still quiet. Only when she turned her head and looked, and when her black and white eyes met with Yang Fan's gaze, did Yang Fan feel that she was moving. The sunlight shone on her face, and her snow-white face seemed to become translucent. Black hair, red lips, and snow-white skin. This was an extremely beautiful girl. Seeing Yang Fan's gaze, the young girl was not embarrassed, nor did she avoid it. She could see that Yang Fan was only looking at her with an appreciative gaze, so the corners of her lips curled up slightly, revealing a clear and shallow smile. The wind came again, blowing the black hair on her shoulder, bringing with it a clear autumn coolness. Yang Fan smiled and nodded in greeting. At this moment, he only felt that such a beautiful and pure girl should only be born in the Jiangnan water village, wrapped in a gentle embrace and not placed in this bleak autumn scene, where lotus leaves withered. But on second thought, he felt that there really was no better scenery that could accommodate and highlight her beauty and cleverness. Her appearance was not absolutely beautiful, at least Wanner's gentle beauty, Taiping's delicate beauty, Anu's charm, Xiaoman's handsomeness, each with their own characteristics not inferior to her. Even that Miss Sun Air from the southern borders Yaozhou was not inferior to her, but no one had her kind of quiet spirituality. That kind of scenery should only belong to the heavens. Although the young girl was magnanimous, and Yang Fan did not have any thoughts of profanity, only pure appreciation, but it was not good to stare at a girl he did not know for too long, so after a slight smile he withdrew his gaze. When he withdrew his gaze, he saw Duguyu with the boy who ran to report the news, walking quickly from the other end of the small bridge. Yang Fan was about to step forward, but he had only taken one step when he felt a sense of danger. When he hurried from the Yaozhou to the barbarian province, he also had this kind of animal-like vigilance on the way. A pity that the Miao people's blow darts were too silent, he did not avoid them, and in the former capital of the Tang dynasty, it was clear that no one used that thing. Yang Fan suddenly turned around and found that 4 tall and sturdy men, who had unknowingly approached the end of the bridge, were crossing their shoulders, looking at him with unkind eyes. Yang Fan only took a glance, and from their movements, the position of their toes and the movement of crossing their shoulders, he could tell that these were 4 sumo masters, and their skills were most likely not much worse than the 8 highly skilled female sumo wrestlers by Princess Taiping's side. Yang Fan raised his eyebrows, feeling that it was a little troublesome. A martial arts master could easily beat 8 or 10 ordinary people. But if the opponent was also a martial arts master and the area was relatively narrow, not allowing him to move around, then it would be more troublesome. At that time when he stormed into the Prime Minister's residence, he still remembered the time when Princess Taiping's female sumo wrestlers grabbed his ankle and pulled him off the horse. At that time, the female sumo servant did not want to hurt him, but the eyes of the 4 people in front of him were filled with killing intent. Knowing that today's banquet is a little strange, I should have brought that scabbard. Yang Fan raised his eyes, looking behind the 4 sumo wrestlers, and saw 8 people slowly walking over from behind. The bodies of these 8 people were not as sturdy as the sumo wrestlers, but they were more agile and nimble. The 8 of them approached like 8 wolves tiptoeing, and the most important thing was that they were all wearing large robes, bulging under the robes, not knowing what kind of weapons they were carrying. Yang Fan smiled bitterly, although I knew that today's banquet was strange. I only guessed that Dugayu's goal was not as simple as making friends. Who would have thought that this was a hangmen banquet? Yang Fan turned his head to look, and sure enough, 20 steps behind Dugayu, there were also more than 10 people following. He was surrounded under the big wild goose pagoda at the head of Farong Bridge. Yang Fan stared at Dugayu. The people following behind Dugayu were still more than 20 steps away from him. Yang Fan was thinking that if he flew up to meet them, would he be able to seize the opportunity to capture the leader of the thieves before those people arrived to help? But before he could move, he discovered that Dugayu might not be the leader of the thieves. Dugayu had originally come over with extremely fast steps, but when 4 burly men suddenly appeared behind Yang Fan, Dugayu's footsteps stopped for a moment, as if he was a little stunned. When another 8 people flashed out from the forest, obviously closing in on Yang Fan, he stopped and turned his head to look behind him. When he turned back again, his face was blank. If this trap was set up by him, of course there was no need for him to put on a show at this time. Yang Fan's heart immediately moved. If it's not him, then who wants to deal with me? Dugayu quickened his pace, almost running towards Yang Fan. There were a few water birds in the lotus leaves, and even a few wild ducks. The small boat and the girl on the boat had been in the lotus leaves for so long, but they had not disturbed these water birds. Dugayu's rustling footsteps had scared them away. The water birds spread their wings, chirping as they flew away. Yang Fan could not help but sigh. This Dugayu does not know martial arts at all. I would rather Dugayu cover his head and run like a rat than let him run up and play the hero. He was surrounded by these people, and although his situation was not very good, but if he had a friend who did not know martial arts, it would be even more difficult for him to escape. Dugayu quickly ran over. Although he did not know martial arts, he was a robust youth. These few steps did not make him gasp for breath, but his breathing was still hurried. That was because of nervousness and anger. Erling, what's going on? Yang Fan spread out his hands. I only brought a belly here to eat and drink. I have no enemies in Chang'an. Could it be that they are here for you? Dugayu's answer was even more brilliant. In Chang'an, who would dare to seek revenge against me? After saying this, Dugayu puffed out his chest and walked up with a calm face. The Dugu family of Chang'an is hosting a banquet for distinguished guests. Who are you ignorant fools? Call your masters over to see me. If you do not give me, Dugayu, an explanation for today's matter, then I will have to give you one. Dugayu's words were said very confidently and very domineering, but it was a pity that after he said these words, those people seemed to have gone deaf. They did react, and their actions were, for sumo masters opened up a pair of large pincers like crabs, took a step sideways and slightly lowered their shoulders, as if they were about to pounce. The four of them moved sideways and had already blocked the bridgehead so that not even a drop of water could leak out. Behind them, the 8 strong men in loose robes also took out weapons from under their clothes. When Yang Fan and Duguyu saw the weapons in their hands, their faces turned a little pale. They were holding crossbows, military crossbows. The iron arrows were already on the bowstrings, and their fingers were already on the hanging knives. Armed crossbows that could shoot 300 steps and pierce through 7 layers of walls. Even a flying bird would not be able to dodge them. Chapter 575. Everything was ready except for the east wind. The east wind was between young Master Lu's small fan. Young Master Lu waved his small fan and excitedly walked out of Hibiscus Garden. Young Master Lu had gone to Hibiscus Garden to test the Kunlun's water slaving skills. He had never expected that Yang Fan would also come to Hibiscus Garden and that his subordinates had chosen to make a move there. There were very few tourists in this season. If the process of making a move was seen by 1 or 2 tourists, they could just finish them off at once. The consequences wouldn't be serious. Wasn't this the best place to make a move? But young Master Lu's subordinates knew that young Master was here. So when the 2 men leading the horses followed Yang Fan and discovered that he was coming along River Chu and heading towards Hibiscus Garden, one of them quickly rode his horse around from outside the forest and hurriedly asked young Master Lu if there was a need to change the time so as not to affect young Master's mood. Young Master Lu had no interest in specifically going to see how his subordinates would execute an official of the court who was his older brother's enemy. But since the 2 sides had coincidentally come together, he didn't mind watching. So this matter didn't dampen his mood. His mood was still very high. Young Master Lu was beaming with joy and waved his small fan even more confidently. The fan was made with ivory as the bone and white silk as the base. It was made with embroidery techniques on both sides. The side that covered the chest was a magpie ascending a branch. The exposed side was a peacock spreading its tail. Peonies and plum blossoms interweaved and scattered. A peacock spreading its colorful tail looked very much like young Master Lu's smug face. Such big words. What explanation do you want to give me? Young Master Lu heard Duguyu's words and immediately followed up with a gloomy voice. Duguyu turned his head and the 2 people's eyes met. They both froze at the same time. Duguyu said in surprise, "Lu Binji." Young Master Lu also said in surprise, "Duguyu." Duguyu saw that it was someone he recognized and immediately let out a sigh of relief. The other had already put out such a lineup. If it was someone he didn't know, he would really be afraid that the other would have no scruples. In a loud voice, Duguyu said, "Erlang is Duga's friend. Today, he is invited to Tsuchi for a banquet. Brother Lu, what is your intention by putting up such a show of force?" At this time, Lu Binji also came to his senses. He dared to kill an official of the imperial court, but he had to kill him without leaving a trace. Even if he couldn't make it look like he died by accident, he had to make sure that there was no evidence that could be used against him. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to bear the consequences. Now that he had already mobilized his men and laid out a sure-kill formation, no matter who saw it, there was no reason for them to stop. If he stopped now, would Yang Fan be willing to give up? Lu Binji had originally planned to settle this matter, no matter who it was that had witnessed it. But he hadn't expected that the witness would be the Dugu family's lord. Lu Binji thought to himself, "This is such bad luck. Why did he have to be present? After the deed is done, it will take more effort to shut his mouth." With this in mind, Lu Binji's tone became more amiable. "Delang, I am sorry. I did not know that you were hosting a banquet today. Otherwise, I would have missed today. It's just that." Lu Binji closed his fan and pointed at Yang Fan, saying gloomily, "This person is your guest, but also my enemy. If Brother Dugu still considers me a friend, please step aside. It won't be too late for me to apologize to Brother Dugu after I end this person." Dugu Yu was furious. "Lu Binji, you know that he is my guest. Yet you still dare to make a move? Lu Binji chuckled. Brother Lu, I have already set up such a formation. It's hard to sheath a knife. His voice suddenly changed, and he shouted, Do it! Who dares? Dugayu opened his hand and blocked in front of Yang Fan, blocking the direction of the 8 men in loose robes. He shouted, Lu Binji, don't go too far! This is Chang, and not your Lu manner. The corner of Lu Binji's mouth curled up slightly as he said, coldly, I know you're the local bully here, but if I wasn't a strong dragon, how would I dare to cross this river of yours? Brother Dugu, you can't scare me. Dugayu said, I can't scare you. But what about the imperial court? Erlang is an official of the court. Killing an official is equivalent to rebellion. How dare you act so recklessly in broad daylight? Lu Binji laughed. My men have already taken control of the outside, so no one else will come in. I wanted to kill everyone here, but I didn't expect you to be here as well. You and I are acquaintances, so I can't be so cruel as to kill you as well. Haha, why haven't you pulled young Master Dugu away? Don't make things difficult for him. The 2 sumo masters moved, swinging their arms as they closed in on Dugayu. As their arms swayed, it was as if they were shaking a mountain. Before they even arrived, their imposing aura made it hard for others to breathe. Dugayu was infuriated and shouted, surnamed Lu, You're too arrogant. Don't think that my Duga family is afraid of your Lu clan. This is Guanzhong, not your Shandong. If you dare treat me like I'm nothing, we'll just part ways. Do you believe that I won't announce this matter to the world if you dare hurt my guest? Lu Binji wiped his eyes and said indifferently, I don't believe it. If you dare do that, you'll form a death grudge with my Lu family. Not to mention that he's only a guest. Even if he were your father, I believe that you wouldn't declare war on my Lu family if you had to pay the price of the entire family, because you're the head of the family. Duguyu's face turned ashen as if he had been exposed, and his body began to tremble uncontrollably. Lu Binji continued, If I wasn't certain of this, I would have long since given the order to kill you as well. Although it would be a bit troublesome, as long as my hands and feet are clean enough, what can your Dugu family do to me? Brother Dugu, I'm not going to hurt him, I'm going to kill him. Yang Fan had been standing there the entire time. He might not have had a chance to escape at first, but Dugayu had opened his arms like a mother hen protecting her chick to block the crossbow. So it wasn't as if he didn't have a chance at all. The crooked river was deep, and it was unknown how deep it was. But Yang Fan could swim in the ocean, so this was naturally not a problem for him. If Dugayu had opened his arms to protect him, and Yang Fan had jumped into the water to escape, with his swimming ability, those crossbow bolts might not have been able to hit him. But Yang Fan hadn't moved, and had been standing there listening to this person who wanted to kill him. Unfortunately, after listening for so long, other than knowing that this person's surname was Lu, his name was Lu Binji, and that he came from a large family in Shandong, he didn't know anything else. He couldn't help but speak. Yang Fan coughed and said, This young Master Lu, I've listened to you for a long time, but I still don't know what kind of enmity you and I have formed. You're a graceful gentleman. You can't just teach and punish, right? Shouldn't you let me die knowing? Lu Binji stared at Yang Fan for a moment, his eyebrows raised, and he smiled. You're in a desperate situation, but you still have such courage, it's admirable. I've always admired brave warriors, but unfortunately, I can't forgive you because of this. Today you must die. If you want to know the cause of death, it's easy. Lu Binji's expression became stern, and he said coldly, Because you're my big brother's enemy. My big brother has painstakingly built Chang, and for many years, and now his great foundation has been destroyed. Tracing back to the source, it might not be without your fault. My big brother doesn't want to kill you, so as his younger brother, I naturally have to do it for him. Yang Fan's knife-like eyebrows slightly furrowed, and after a moment they slowly relaxed, and his eyes revealed a look of relief. Young Master Jiang? Lu Binji said hatefully, That's right. Yang Fan nodded lightly and said to himself, So young Master Jiang's surname is Liu? Yes, the surname Liu originates from the surname Jiang. And if he wants to change his surname, the surname Jiang is naturally the best. Haha, so you're Fan Yang's Liu family? Liu Binji smiled proudly and didn't answer, as if he didn't care to answer. He closed his fan, raised his hand, and between his fingers was a pearl the size of a longan fruit, and said in a clear voice, "Before he dies, whoever can pick up this pearl will be heavily rewarded by this young master." Liu Binji bent his finger, and the pearl drew an arc in the air. When the sunlight reflected, it was suffused with colorful light, like a rainbow after the rain. One end of the rainbow seemed to be still tied to Liu Binji's hand, and the other end had already disappeared into the clear river. Several Kunlun slaves, standing behind Liu Binji, rushed into the river. Bang, bang. Several Kunlun slaves dived into the river one after another, and at the same time, the 4 sumo wrestlers that were slowly approaching suddenly increased their speed and fiercely pounced towards Yang Fan. They rushed past Dugiyu, and the bluestone under their feet trembled like wooden planks. When the tall figures rushed past Dugiyu, it was like 4 mad bulls rushing past a female deer. Dugiyu trembled, and in the end, he didn't have the courage to stop them. He also had guards, but he didn't bring them with him. How could he know that when he went to the bridgehead to welcome the guests, he would be met with such a scene? Moreover, Liu Binji was well prepared, and even if he brought 2 guards, it would be of no use. Liu Binji's rudeness made him angry and hateful, but Liu Binji's threat also made him secretly cold. He was really afraid that Liu Binji would harden his heart and kill him. So when the 4 angry bears rushed past him, he didn't have enough courage to stop them. When the 4 sumo wrestlers rushed towards Yang Fan arched his body, and like a cheetah, he pounced towards Liu Binji. The bulls followed, and the cheetah in front, as if they were pouncing towards Liu Binji together. Yang Fan had waited until now to confirm the other party's identity. Now that the truth was out, he naturally had to capture the leader. Pa, pa, pa. Fists, palms, legs, and feet. In an instant, it was unknown how many moves had been exchanged. In just an instant, Yang Fan and the 2 guards in front of Liu Binji had already exchanged more than 10 moves. There were still 2 more guards standing beside Liu Binji, waiting for the next move. The 2 guards that rushed over were all skilled in martial arts, and when their fists and feet clashed with Yang Fan, a series of terrifying, explosive sounds rang out. Yang Fan's hands and feet were somewhat numb. He was confident that he could take down these 2, but he needed time. Even if he took down these 2, there were still 2 more behind him. At this time, the 4 sumo wrestlers had already fallen, and like 2 waves, they fiercely smashed towards Yang Fan. If this fall landed, it was likely that they would directly snap Yang Fan's waist. When fighting with these 4 black bears, he could only use small martial arts. If he wanted to fight them head-on, they could use their weight to crush Yang Fan. However, the small bridge wasn't very wide, and there wasn't enough space for Yang Fan to twist and turn. Yang Fan's body shot out like a spirit ape, and he hooked onto the stone railing with one hand. His entire body whizzed out, and he hung above the river. Whoosh, whoosh! Just as his body emerged from the bridge, 2 crossbow bolts shot towards his suspended body. Chapter 576. Unless it was absolutely necessary, these crossbowmen didn't want to shoot Yang Fan. Once they shot him, they would be injured. If possible, it would be best to let him die a natural death. For example, drowning. Every year, many people drowned in the Chu River. Some drowned when boats capsized, some drowned in the wild. Officials of the imperial court were also human, so why couldn't they drown? But since he had approached the young master, they would rather shoot him to death than allow him to pose a threat to the young master, even if it was just a possibility. Unless it was absolutely necessary, Yang Fan didn't want to expose himself to the shooting range of their crossbows. He didn't even think about jumping into the air. Under the control of the 8 military crossbows, Anyone who tried to jump into the air would immediately become a dead bird, a stupid bird. So his body only spun outside the stone railing for a moment before suddenly turning back. He didn't expect that they would be able to seize this opportunity to attack. These people were true archery experts. Not only were they accurate, but they were also good at seizing opportunities. Yang Fan's figure spun outwards, and when he suddenly rolled back, 2 crossbow bolts brushed past his thighs. Yang Fan once again spun back to the bridge. Both his feet kicked the waist of a sumo wrestler, causing him to fall down and crash into the bridge, causing it to tremble. A few dark faces with curly hair appeared on the surface of the water. They were the Kunlun slaves who had dived into the water to search for the pearl. They took a deep breath, dived into the water again, and dived underwater. They were excellent swimmers. A whirlpool appeared on the surface of the water following their bodies. Then it turned into a circle of ripples. There wasn't even a splash. Duguyu stood there in a daze. He wanted to rush forward and stop them, but he didn't have the ability or the courage to do so. He couldn't turn a blind eye to this. Duguyu was in great pain. He struggled in his heart and hated Lu Binji to death. "Young master," Lu opened his fan again. A peacock spread its tail and fluttered in front of his chest. Clouds floated across the sky, casting a shadow. It was as if a big fish was swimming under the Chu River. From time to time, a curly-haired, dark-faced Kunlun slave would emerge from the surface of the river. After taking a deep breath, he would plunge back into the water. The 6 crossbowmen on the shore stared calmly at the fight on the bridge. The sharp arrowheads caught Yang Fan's figure among the moving figures. The other 2 crossbowmen took out 2 iron arrows from their backpacks and unhurriedly knocked them. The lethality of a crossbow was greater than that of a bow, but the speed at which an arrow was loaded was much slower. However, given the current situation, they were not in a hurry. Young Master Lu was still waving his fan. Yang Fan was entangled by the 4 sumo wrestlers and did not attack him again. The 2 bodyguards in front of him also retreated, and the 4 of them firmly protected him. In the distance, some people appeared along both sides of the Chu River and behind the forest on the opposite side. Occasionally, there would be pedestrians approaching, but they would immediately stop them and say something to persuade them to leave. There was only a small boat near the water. It was a narrow boat that looked like a willow leaf. It did not seem to be moving, but unknowingly it had already approached the long bridge. The sky moved, the earth moved, the scenery moved, and the people moved. Yang Fan's figure was as nimble as a ghost. He weaved in and out of the 4 sumo wrestlers that were as thick as bears, like a butterfly weaving through flowers. The 4 sumo wrestlers were all experts. As long as one of them was entangled, the other 3 would be able to pounce on him and choke him. At that time, he would not be able to use any of his skills, so Yang Fan did not dare to stop for even a moment. Yang Fan seemed to want to break through the encirclement of the 4 sumo wrestlers and pounce on Lu Binji. However, the 4 men weaved a large net that was equally tight in defense and offense. Yang Fan could not break through at all. Even if he could not break through, there were still 4 people by Lu Binji's side. How could he break through their defense? Therefore, Yang Fan gradually moved towards the side of the bridge. It looked like he wanted to find an opportunity to escape. His movement technique was very ingenious. From beginning to end, he was entangled with the 4 sumo wrestlers, using their bodies to block the crossbow bolts behind him. The 5 of them were in an intense fight, so the 4 sumo wrestlers naturally did not notice his intentions. However, Master Lu clearly saw through Yang Fan's intentions. Master Lu no longer waved his fan. He furrowed his brows, closed his fan, pointed it forward, and shouted, "Kill! I only want him to die." Following this shout, the 2 bodyguards in front of him pounced forward. The 4 sumo wrestlers used their ultimate moves. One pressed down from above, one rushed forward in a bear hug, and 2 rushed towards Yang Fan's thighs. the two sumo wrestlers behind Yang Fan were the two sumo wrestlers behind him. As they bent down, they exposed the upper half of Yang Fan's body. 8 men immediately pointed their crossbows at Yang Fan, their fingers on the hanging blades, ready to shoot arrows at any time. Yang Fan spun around, his knee slamming heavily into the face of the man who was trying to bear hug him. He punched out with both fists, raising fire to burn the heavens, aiming for the chest of the man who was pressing down on him. However, at this moment, he could not avoid the 2 people who were hugging his legs from behind him. However, no one expected him to use a feint at such a critical moment. The instant Yang Fan raised his fist, he suddenly pulled in his abdomen and bent his body, retracting the knee that was ramming into the face of the man who was pouncing forward. His feet stomped heavily on the ground, and he shot out diagonally, brushing against the railing at the head of the bridge and scurrying towards the river. When Yang Fan's body scurried towards the river at a strange angle, the 2 men who were pouncing towards his thighs closed their iron pincer like hands with a loud bang, and they caught nothing but air. The man who was pressing down from the sky lost his target and crashed heavily to the ground. When the man who was trying to bear hug him saw Yang Fan's knee, he hastily retracted his 2 fan-like hands and used them to block in front of him. In that instant, Yang Fan was already on Lingyu River. Just like the cloud in the sky, he also cast a shadow on the surface of the water. He was like a fish that was much smaller than the cloud, and he swiftly swam across the water. Whoosh! One of the Kunlun slaves drilled out of the water. He had just taken a deep breath when Yang Fan tapped on the top of his head with 1 foot. The Kunlun slave let out a groan, and like a stake that had been rammed into the ground, he plunged straight into the water. Yang Fan used the momentum to leap another 5 feet towards the surface of the water in front of him. Northerners rarely knew how to swim, unless they were fishermen for a living. Or perhaps the youths in the northern countryside were naughty from a young age, and they often went into the water to play in the summer. They would practice swimming in rivers and lakes, but city people, especially the children of wealthy families, had no reason to practice swimming. Lu Binji knew that this Yang Fan was his big brother's enemy, but he didn't know where he came from. It wasn't that he couldn't find out, but that he didn't want to know. Therefore, Lu Binji didn't know that Yang Fan knew how to swim. When he stopped Yang Fan, he also didn't think that this person knew how to swim and could use the water to escape. And since Yang Fan was intercepted at the bridgehead, his performance all along definitely did not look like he knew how to swim. Even though he was now exposed to the attack range of the crossbow bolts, he did not dive head first into the water. Instead, with the help of the Kunlun slave, he strived to leap into the air. Everything proved that he didn't know how to swim. Therefore, when the 3 archers who had the best angle and were in front pointed their crossbows at Yang Fan, who was on the surface of the water, the person behind who seemed to be the leader suddenly had a flash in his eyes. He stepped forward and pushed the elbows of the 2 archers. Whoosh, whoosh! 2 archers pierced through the clouds. The 2 people turned back in shock, and the person behind said anxiously, "Isn't it better to let him die in the water?" They didn't know whether Yang Fan knew how to swim or not, and even if he did, what could he do? In the water, there were 9 Kunlun slaves that were the best at swimming. They were as agile as 9 black loaches in the water. Even if he knew how to swim, could he be better than these Kunlun slaves? Even if he was really good at swimming, he was still doomed to die in the water when it was 1 against 9. Lu Binji obviously also quickly thought of this point, and he couldn't help but smile. This time, Yang Fan really committed suicide. Even the most brilliant detective and expert would not be able to find any clues. Unfortunately, there was still an arrow shooting at Yang Fan. Lu Binji could only hope that Yang Fan was lucky and could avoid this arrow. Yang Fan stepped on the Kunlun slaves and jumped another 5 feet, but he still couldn't avoid falling into the water. But he had just jumped 4 feet when a sharp bamboo pole pierced through the air. This stab was very fast, and the sharp point of the pole was not inferior to a spear. If it had hit, it would have definitely pierced through his body. However, the pole was only 3 feet away from him, so how could it hurt him? This pole was not to hurt people, but to save people. Yang Fan, who was in the air, could even faintly hear a young girl's delicate voice. Save him! Yang Fan had his reasons for not wanting to enter the water unless it was absolutely necessary, but at this moment he had no other choice. Originally, he was thinking of sinking into the water, but as soon as he saw someone pass him the punching pole, he hastily dispelled the idea. He stretched out his arm and grabbed the tip of the pole. The boat maiden holding the pole pulled back, and Yang Fan swept towards the bow of the boat. Even the most skilled archer would not be able to predict that Yang Fan would be able to change direction and sweep horizontally in the air. There was nowhere to borrow strength in the air, and this was impossible. So the arrow missed, and the sharp arrow whistled through the air, only a foot away from the bottom of Yang Fan's boots. Bang! With a soft sound, Yang Fan landed on the boat. The moment he touched the ground, the boat lady, who was over middle-aged but still beautiful, reached out to support him. Thus, the force of his landing was very light, only causing the boat to shake violently a few times. The girl in white sat on the other side of the boat, one hand holding the side of the boat, the other hand covering her mouth, and was coughing violently. The boat shook a few times and slowly stabilized, and the girl's coughing also became softer. Don't move. That's my sister. Seeing this scene, Dugayu, who had been standing on the bridge, suddenly came back to his senses and shouted. As he shouted, he rushed to the bridgehead, held the white marble railing, and said in a panic, Ning Kuyu, what are you doing? Lu Binji frowned and hurriedly waved his fan to stop his men's movement. In any case, Yang Fan wouldn't be able to escape, so it would be better if the Duga family didn't start a feud with them. He, Lu Binji, wasn't someone who didn't know the gravity of the situation. The reason why he had dared to kill Yang Fan was because such a shocking act wouldn't be traced back to the Lu family as long as it was done discreetly. Ningku? Sister? Dugu. Ningku. Yang Fan had just heard this name from Princess Taiping yesterday, and he did not expect to see her today. This girl who stopped between the lotus canal like a gentle water lotus was actually Duga Ningku? Chapter 577. Duga Ningku's voice was not high when she shouted, Save him, just now. At least after being used to the loud voices of Xuanqi, Gongsun Bufan, and Gongsun Lanji, Yang Fan felt that the girl's voice was crisp and soft, just like an oriole singing on a willow branch. But it seemed that Miss Ning seldom used such a small cry, so she began to cough nonstop after the cry. When Yang Fan looked at her, her fair and clean face, which was like a freshly peeled egg, was flushed due to choking and coughing. Her palm-sized face was so thin that it was delicate. With her small hand covering her mouth, only the two flushes on her cheeks and her pair of clever eyes could be seen. The girl glanced at him, her eyes as deep as the blue sky in autumn, and then she gently lowered her eyes, cutting off her bright eyes. When she lowered her eyes, the tips of her eyebrows slightly curved. Her eyebrows were very thin, forming a faint and elegant arc. The boatwoman, holding the pole, walked past Yang Fan. The boat was very small and narrow. Yang Fan not only knew how to swim, but also knew how to steer a boat. So as soon as he landed on the boat, he stood in the most stable position. The boatwoman was obviously also a master of steering a boat. Judging from Yang Fan's standing posture, she knew that he was good at swimming. For a person who was good at swimming, the best way to escape was to jump into the water. Although it was not safe under the water, it was obviously much safer than on the shore. But he refused to try to jump into the water, which was a bit strange. So when the boatwoman walked past him, she glanced at him with a strange look. The boatwoman walked over and gently helped Miss Ningku up. Her face was slender, and her figure was even more slender. He didn't feel it when she was sitting, but when she stood up, Yang Fan only felt that her waist was so thin that he could hold it in one hand. Her white dress fluttered in the river wind, as if she was about to fly away with the wind. Duguyu rushed to the edge of the bridge. Seeing that the girl stood up and was not accidentally hurt, he was greatly relieved and said, Ning Ke, you scared me to death. Why didn't you stay there? Why did you jump out? Ning Ke said, eldest brother's way of doing things is inappropriate. A look of shame appeared on Dugayu's face as he lowered his head and said, yes, elder brother is incompetent, and he has ruined the Dugu family's reputation. Ning Ke shook her head gently. Yang Fan looked at her from behind. He could only see her shaking her slender neck elegantly, slowly and firmly. Reputation is not important. Ning Ke held the barge's pole in the water like a lonely girl holding a bamboo pole. Reason is the most important. Brother Yang is a guest invited by elder brother. There's no such thing as treating a guest in this world. Her voice was a little hoarse. It seemed that she rarely spoke, so when she opened her mouth occasionally, her pronunciation was a little jerky. Therefore, her words were always as simple as possible. But her soft voice revealed a sense of firmness, which did not weaken because of her weak voice. Duguyu hesitated and said, I don't want to, but I can't do anything, Ning Ke said. It's your responsibility. Even if you can't bear it, you have to bear it. Big families paid special attention to rules and seniority. Ning Ke was the younger sister, but every word she said was lecturing her elder brother. Duguyu didn't know whether it was out of love or respect for her, but he didn't feel that there was anything wrong with his sister's tone. He smiled bitterly and said, Little sister, I'm worried about the Lu family. I'm related to the whole Dugu family. How can I rashly make a strong enemy? Ning Ke chuckled and raised her eyebrows. She asked, what is a family? The aunt who steers the boat, the manservant behind you, the bodyguard in front of young Master Lu. Everyone has an ancestor. Why don't they have a family? If only wealth is passed down, is it still a family? This sentence was a little long, and then she coughed slightly as if she was a little tired. Ha 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 ha, well said. Lu Binji closed his fan and walked over to look her up and down. His eyes showed a little surprise when he saw Ning Ke's elegant and refined appearance. Then he regained his composure and said with a smile, It's a pity that you're not a man. Otherwise, the Dugu family would have called you the head of the family. Lu Binji patted his palm with his fan and said leisurely, However, I don't dare to agree with you. Reputation is indeed not important, and neither is reason. Only one thing is important, and that is strength. Let's not talk about the distant emperor. His wife usurped his husband's power, and his mother seized the throne. For the sake of the throne, he killed his son, his daughter, his in-laws, and his mother's family. What reason is there to talk about? Lu Binji had already made up his mind to kill Yang Fan today. At the same time, he didn't worry that the Dugu family would be stupid enough to spread these words. So he said it without any scruples. Ning Ke said, Justice is in the hearts of the people. Lu Binji said disdainfully, The hearts of the people? What's the use of the hearts of the people? Luo Binwen scolded her to his heart's content in a paper, but she is still a high and mighty empress. Those who were killed by her, some lost their husbands and some lost their sons. But didn't they still have to crawl at her feet and flatter her? Maybe thousands of years later, the later generations will praise her as a rare empress in the world, just because she is an unprecedented empress. If you can do what you can't, then you are a peerless hero. Who cares if what you do is benevolent, righteous, and reasonable? Without strength, you are full of reasons and no one will help you. But with strength, you can decide everything. Ha! Lu Binji said without any scruples, and laughed even more unscrupulously. Ning Ke gently shook her head and said, I am not talking about your heart or his heart, but my heart, my own heart. Brother Yang is a guest of the Dugu family, and the Dugu family has the responsibility to protect his safety. If young Master Lu wants to kill him, then you have to kill all the people of the Dugu family first. Her voice had never been fast, nor was it loud, but it had always been very powerful. Her body was as weak as a daughter, but the spirit in her words was as vigorous as a pine tree on a towering rock. Lu Binji's eyes shrank, and he said in a cold voice, Are you threatening me? Even if I kill you, Do you think that I killed the people of the Duga family? Without solid evidence, do you think that the Duga family is willing to go to war with my Lu family at all costs? What's the point of dying with him? Ning quietly said, Nothing else. I just want peace of mind. Lu Binji's face began to change, and his eyes drifted like the clouds in the sky. Yang Fan stared at his palm, which was gradually tightening its grip on the fan, and the drifting light in his eyes gradually became fierce. Yang Fan immediately understood that Lu Binji had made a decision, and from his expression and reaction, the intervention of the Duga family didn't make him stop, but instead forced him to stake everything on one throw. Yang Fan secretly took a breath and quietly moved an inch forward with the tip of his foot. His original plan had to be changed. The person was coming for him, and he couldn't let this innocent and weak woman get hurt. At this moment, Yang Fan suddenly saw two people, and his body that was about to explode suddenly stopped. Lu Binji said that his people had controlled the surroundings, and no one could break in and see what they shouldn't see. Yang Fan believed the sentence. Since Lu Binji had arranged killers to kill him, it was inevitable. Lu Binji was very rampant now, and dared to kill an official in broad daylight, but his biggest advantage was that no one would know that he did it, and no one would even know why Yang Fan died. If this matter was exposed, he couldn't bear it, and neither could any aristocratic family. When the tiger was not here, he could bare his fangs and brandish his claws, as if he was the tiger, and he was more like a tiger than a tiger. But once the real tiger showed its power, he couldn't bear a fierce tiger's claw. Therefore, no one could come in, no matter what the Lu family did. They couldn't let anyone in. But now, two people were walking over. Yang Fan was the first to see it, because what he was truly afraid of was not the 4 sumo wrestlers, nor the 4 bodyguards by young Master Lu's side. What he truly cared about were the 8 people with the crossbows, so no matter what he was listening to or looking at, he never relaxed his vigilance against those 8 people. The 2 people who suddenly appeared had walked out from the forest behind the 8 people. There was a winding path in the forest. 2 people walked slowly step by step from the path, one holding the other, walking even slower than Miss Ning's talking. The person being supported was a white-haired old man, wearing a black gauze crown that was not commonly seen. He was wearing a loose robe with big sleeves, and it was unknown how many times the sleeves had been folded. It was estimated that it was enough to make another set of clothes. He was wearing a black Buddhist robe as thin as a cicada's wing, and a pair of wooden clogs with high teeth on his feet. The old man was no longer young, but his spirit was still very hale and hearty. It seemed that his body was quite sturdy, his slender neck was held high, and his back was also ramrod straight. The high-toothed wooden clogs were not very easy to move, and had to be step by step, so when he walked he looked like a white-headed, long-legged crane. It was no wonder that he could not walk fast. The person supporting him was over middle-aged, ordinary-looking, and wearing a blue robe. He held the old man with his hands, and his face was full of smiles. But no one paid attention to him, because no one was used to looking at a servant. People would only look at his master, except for Yang Fan. Yang Fan glanced at him, and felt that he was a little familiar. After a closer look, he immediately remembered that this person was Lin Zixiong, the Lin Zixiong that he had met in the Miao family's village in the barbarian province. When Yang Fan saw them, Miss Ning Ku also saw them. Ning Ku was surprised at first, and then overjoyed. Dugayu and Lu Binji saw the change of her expression, and they immediately turned their heads to look. Then they were stunned, and then Dugayu was overjoyed and Lu Binji's face changed. The white-headed, crane-like old man continued to walk forward. The 8 green-robed men with crossbows also noticed the commotion and turned around. Lu Binji, whose face had changed color, suddenly shouted, "All of you, stop! Move to the side." The 8 crossbowmen suddenly separated to the left and right. The white-haired old man's pace was neither fast nor slow, and he still walked with very elegant, immortal crane steps, swaying step by step. The 4 sumo masters also subconsciously retreated to the left and right, and stood next to the bridge railing, making way for him. The old man walked to Dugayu's side and stopped. His face was clear, and his skin was covered with fine wrinkles, but he obviously took good care of himself, and his skin was still white and lustrous. The old man's eyes swept over Dugayu and Lu Binji's faces, and the two immediately bowed deeply and called, "Great-grandfather!" The old man's eyes didn't linger on them, but directly fell on Duganingku. As soon as he saw Duganingku, the old man's wrinkled face suddenly smiled like a blooming autumn chrysanthemum, and immediately showed her a treasure excitedly. "Ningku girl, this old man just found a good treasure 2 days ago. Ha! Guess what it is?" The old man's eyes were probably blurred, and he didn't see the dense killing intent here, and only cared about showing off his good treasure to his fellow collectors. Chapter 578. When Duguninka saw the old man, she immediately felt relieved. She didn't know why the old man suddenly appeared here, but since he was here, nothing would happen. Everything would be fine, and everything would be fine. At this moment, Lu Binji was as obedient as a kitten that was still drinking milk. Duguninka saluted to the old man cheerfully and said in a sweet and naive voice, "Ninka pays respect to old great-grandfatherly. What kind of treasure did you get?" "Ha! It took me a lot of effort to find that treasure. You will like it when you see it. I'll keep you in suspense and not tell you. You'll be shocked when you see it," the old man said happily and turned his head to ask, "Which one of you is hosting the banquet today?" Duguyu stepped forward and answered, "Old grandfather, I am hosting the banquet to entertain the guests." The old man laughed and said, "Well, I will invite you to drink a cup of wine." After saying that, the old man said to Ningku, "Girl, come and sit with me." Speaking of this, he took a look at Yang Fan and said with a smile, "You must be Ningku's friend, right? Let's go together." After saying that, the old man raised his head and strode forward like a crane. His pair of wooden clogs clattered as he walked over to Lu Binji's side. Without stopping, he said, "And you?" Duguyu turned his head to look at Ningku and then at Yang Fan. Ningku nodded to him knowingly, and Duguyu followed the old man. At this time he was completely relieved. With the old man here, unless Lu Binji was crazy, he wouldn't dare to use force again. So this matter was solved? Difficult. Duguninka turned to look at Yang Fan and said softly with a little joy on his face, "The Dugu family is very sorry for mistreating our distinguished guest. Brother Yang, please don't take it to heart. Brother Yang might as well go to the hibiscus garden with us. As long as old grandfatherly is here, he can guarantee your safety." On the bridge, Lu Binji said angrily, "Why is old grandfatherly here? Who brought him here?" Of course, no one answered this question. Lu Binji thought for a moment, then waved his hand to summon a guard. He lowered his voice and said, "You go! Quickly return to the residence." Lu Binji's voice gradually became softer and softer until it could no longer be heard. The imperial bodyguard nodded his head heavily and flew away. 8 men armed with crossbows rushed in front of Lu Binji. Lu Binji winked at them. Then, with a gloomy face, he chased after the old man. The 8 crossbowmen immediately spread out and stared at Yang Fan. It seemed that if he dared to escape, these people would not hesitate to shoot him. The old man's arrival might have temporarily eased the situation, but how could this matter be resolved without a conclusion? Duguninka's boat parted the lotuses and swayed leisurely to the shore. When the boat reached the shore, Yang Fan was still standing firmly on the boat. Miss Ningku was not good at swimming, so she had already sat down when the boat was moving. When they reached the shore, the boatwoman went ashore first, tied the boat, and then came to help Ningku. Only then did Ningku step ashore. Yang Fan's feet were firmly fixed on the boat until Miss Ningku stood firmly on the shore. Then he stepped forward and followed Miss Ningku to the hibiscus garden. Seeing this, the 8 crossbowmen relaxed their vigilance and followed behind them as if they were escorting criminals. A Kunlun slave, who was fishing for pearls, emerged from the water. He raised a pearl in his hand and shouted loudly. After shouting several times, he felt that something was strange. Treading on the water, he stood in the middle of the river, momentarily not knowing what to do. Miss Ning said to Yang Fan, "My brother is in charge of the family at a young age. There are some elders in the family who are not convinced by him and often find fault with him. My brother is careful in everything and cares about everything. Over time, he has become overcautious and indecisive. That's why I didn't try my best to protect him just now. Brother Yang, please don't blame me." This speech was a little long. Although Miss Ning spoke softly and slowly, but because she was walking and talking at the same time, she still felt a little out of breath and couldn't help coughing. Yang Fan frowned slightly and said, "Miss Ning doesn't seem to be in good health." Ning smiled and said lightly, "I'm used to the illness I brought from the womb. It's nothing." Yang Fan said, "Just now, Brother Dugu stood up for this Yang. This Yang saw it with his own eyes. In that situation, it's hard for Brother Dugu to do anything for me. Do you really want him to die with me? I'd rather he live. Then there will be someone to burn incense and candles for me on the day of my death, and someone to take care of my family." Ning said in a low voice, "Thank you for your understanding, Brother Yang." Yang Fan laughed heartily and said, "You're welcome. Brother Duga's behavior just now is also human nature. I don't blame you. But Miss Ning Kuo, you are not inferior to men. I have a whole new level of respect for you." Yang Fan said with a smile and turned his head, only to find that she was 2 steps behind him. Although he didn't walk fast, Miss Ning still couldn't catch up with him. In order to catch up with his footsteps, Ning's face was flushed, but she was still trying hard to bear it. Seeing this, Yang Fan hurriedly slowed down. Ning felt his thoughtfulness and gave him a gentle smile. Yang Fan said in his heart, "I've only heard that Miss Ning is frail before. Today I've seen Miss Ning's delicate and timid body." This was a very strange banquet. Sitting at the host's seat was an inexplicable old man. The old man occupied the host's seat as if he was very familiar with him, and the host was pushed to one side. Lin Zixiong and Yang Fan were old acquaintances, but they didn't have time to talk. Lin Zixiong stood behind the old man with his hands down and only nodded to Yang Fan. It seemed that unless the old man introduced himself, Lin Zixiong would never introduce him. Miss Ning shouldn't have been at the banquet. The reason why she came to the lake today was not only to relax but also to see Yang Fan. But now not only was she at the banquet, but she was also pulled to sit at the second seat by the old man. But Ning's treatment was even better than the old man's. There was a back behind her seat, and there was a soft cushion on the back. Dugu and Yang Fan sat side by side. Because there was an elder, it was inconvenient for them to talk. Moreover, his momentary weakness on the bridge made this young master of the Dugu clan unable to raise his head in front of Yang Fan. He was also too embarrassed to talk to him. Lu Binji sat opposite to Yang Fan and was like a ferocious wolf dog that was itching to fight. But old man Li was sitting above, so Lu Binji didn't dare to act rashly. Yang Fan was absent-mindedly guessing everyone's identity and background. Lin Zixiong was sent by the hidden sect to contact him, and the hidden sect's backer was the 7 sects and 5 families. At this moment, he was standing behind old man Li like a docile dog. Even the arrogant young master Lu didn't dare to act rashly in front of this old man Li. Then he must be an important figure in the 7 sects and 5 families. It was just that he didn't know if he was Longxi Li or Zhao Jun Li. Lu Binji's identity had been clarified through his previous conversation with Dugu. Lu Binji came from the Lu clan of Fanyang, and now, even young Master Zhang's true identity was confirmed. This was a great thing for Yang Fan. He wanted to deal with young Master Zhang. Knowing young Master Zhang's true identity was equivalent to grasping one more trump card. Yang Fan found it strange that no matter if it was the Li clan or the Lu clan They were all prestigious clans in Shandong, but the Duga clan was a noble clan in Guanlong. Could it be that these two opposing factions had formed an alliance under the suppression of the empress? If an old man was energetic and cheerful, most of them would turn into an old child. This old man, Li, was no exception. Among everyone present, he was the oldest, but his temperament was the most childlike. Just now on the bridge, he said that he would keep Ningke guessing and that he would show Ningke what treasures he had found when they arrived at his mansion. However, after sitting down for a while, he restrained himself. It was not easy for him to meet this old friend. How could he wait to go home? As soon as he sat down, he proudly asked Ningke to guess what he had got. Ningke guessed wrong several times. The old man was so anxious that he scratched his ears and cheeks. He couldn't help but announce the answer himself. The zither of Qi Hung is called Haozhong. The zither of Chu Zhuang is called Lingering Beam. The zither of Sima is called Green Damask, and the zither of Kaiyong is called Jiaowei. They are all famous instruments in the world. Ningke, guess which one I got? Ningke was tired of sitting and was leaning on the cushion. Hearing this, she was delighted and sat up straight. She said happily, "Grandpa, you got a zither? Green Damask or Jiaowei?" Haozhong and Lingering Beam were famous zither from the spring and autumn period and the Warring States period. It was too long ago, so it was unlikely that old Manly got them. So it could only be Green Damask and Jiaowei. The old man stroked his beard and said happily, "It's Green Damask." "Ha! This zither now belongs to this old man." "Really?" Ningke's eyes lit up immediately. Sima Xiangru's Green Damask? The one that played a phoenix seeking for a phoenix? "I want to see it." The old man said complacently, "You can see it if you want, but you can't ask me for it." "Ha! When I'm done playing with it, well, on your birthday next year, I'll give it to you as a birthday gift." Ningke said with a smile, "It's a deal." Hey, the old man couldn't possibly lie to him. "On your birthday next year, this Green Damask will be yours. Ha! Have a drink with me first." As soon as the old man raised his cup, Dugayu and Lu Binji immediately raised theirs. But Yang Fan didn't support them. He put his hands on the table and looked at them coldly. When the old man looked at him, Yang Fan said seriously, "Senior, it's Brother Dugu who invited me to the banquet today. It's okay for you to steal the host's place. I can see that you're a distinguished guest." Shocked, Dugu quietly tugged at his clothes from the side. Yang Fan ignored him and said seriously, "I don't know why you're here, but I believe you're aware that Lu Binji gathered a group of people to assassinate me. Now that Senior has pulled us together to chat and drink wine together, do you think this matter can be left unsettled? It's about my life and the law of the country. Old man, you don't have that much influence. Even this scene can't suppress me." Chapter 579. Yang Fan sneered and said, "In Senior's mind, perhaps what we did is like a child's play, and it's not even as practical as a guqin. But in my mind, even if all the famous weapons in the world are piled up together, they're not as important as my own life." Yang Fan pointed at Lu Binji and said sternly, "I believe that Senior can also see that Lu Binji has not given up on killing me. And I can't give up just like that. Killing an official is equivalent to rebellion, and the consequences are serious. I advise Senior to pretend that you don't know anything about this matter and leave. If Senior is willing to bear the responsibility, then you have to give me a clear explanation." Hearing this, a strange light flashed in old Grandpa Li's old eyes, and Miss Ningke also couldn't help looking at Yang Fan with a strange light in her eyes. When old Grandpa Li came, he really didn't know what was going on here, but how could he not know now? He and Miss Ningke echoed each other in talking about antiques and famous weapons, but in the end they just wanted to ease the atmosphere and then solve this matter slowly. After all, no matter how rampant the Lu boy was, the Lu family and many aristocratic families were in the same boat, and behind Yang Fan stood the imperial court, so he was not a pushover. Unless they let go and let Yang Fan die, it would take a lot of effort to solve this matter properly. But they didn't expect that Yang Fan didn't care about the power they showed. He was obviously at a disadvantage, and even like a prisoner waiting to be executed. But he still dared to be aggressive and take the initiative to point out this matter. Lu Binji's face turned fierce, and he sneered. For the sake of old Grandpa Li, I wanted to let you live a little longer. But I didn't expect you to be so impatient. If you don't spare me, do you think I will spare you? You can enter Hibiscus Garden today, but you can't leave. Lu Binji slammed his wine cup heavily on the table. The 4 sumo wrestlers and 8 samurai with concealed crossbows immediately took a step forward. Only his 4 personal bodyguards remained motionless. Dugu Yu also had guards under him. Seeing this, the 8 armed guards immediately held their sword springs in their hands and took a step forward, giving tit for tat. Just a moment ago, they were still talking and laughing, and in a harmonious atmosphere, but in a moment, they were at daggers drawn and murderous. What are you doing? Are you looking down on this old man? Great-grandfather Li coldly rebuked and stopped both sides from making a move. He then put down his wine cup and looked at Yang Fan. He sighed and said, Alas! This old man originally wanted to feign ignorance, but you, this young man, are not willing to forgive me. Yang Fan didn't say anything, only staring at him coldly. Old Master Li pondered for a moment and said, while stroking his beard, I am also in a difficult position regarding this matter. How about this? This old man will have the Lu family's son apologize to you solemnly and compensate you with a generous gift. He will swear that he will never make things difficult for you again. How about it? Before Yang Fan could say anything, Lu Binji's expression changed drastically. Great-grandfather, you can't do that. Grandson respects great-grandfather, but grandson does not dare to agree to this matter. Great-grandfather Li's face darkened as he scolded. Why can't you agree? Do you want to kill an official and rebel? If killing people could solve the problem, would it be your turn to do it? You're 100 times worse than your eldest brother. What a good-for-nothing. You dare to disobey this old man's words? Lu Binji's face turned red, but he gritted his teeth and said, Great-grandfather can say whatever you want, but grandson will not agree to this matter. This matter is between my Lu family and that surnamed Yang. Old Master Li, please don't meddle in this matter. The old man was furious. He glared at him and said, So what if I meddle in this matter? This time, before Lu Binji could say anything, Yang Fan rushed to answer. Junior appreciates old master's good intentions. But regarding this matter, Junior also thinks that it is better for Senior to stay out of it. Great-grandfather Li restrained his anger and said indifferently, It is a good thing for a young man to have courage and insight. But sometimes you cannot be too arrogant. Although you are an official, the Lu family is a colossus that you cannot afford to provoke. Old Grandpa Li said, It's not just you. For so many years, from Emperor Taizong to Emperor Gaozong, and now the Divine Empress, we, the aristocratic families, have always secretly opposed them. And there have also been times when we openly opposed them, but aren't we still fine? We don't want to rebel, and the Emperor knows that we won't rebel. The Emperor wants to suppress us, but he can't leave us. We are the same. We can't let the Emperor suppress us, but we can't leave him either. Ha! In this big world, love and hate, friend and foe, it is impossible to distinguish. Take a step back, and the world will be wide open. Yang Fan said with a smile, Junior also wants to take a step back, and the world will be wide open. But now that Junior wants to retreat, I will fall into the lake. Great-grandfather's great principles have nothing to do with Junior. Junior's way of doing things is very simple, and my thinking is also simple. Whoever wants me dead, I will kill that person. This Junior only wants peace. Great-grandfather Li's white eyebrows rose. This old man will make him swear in the name of the Lu family's ancestors. No matter how naughty and mischievous this kid is, he will not dare to go back on his word. What do you think? Old geezer, you are quite generous. For an outsider, you want my grandson to swear in the name of my Lu family's ancestors? You can't make the decision for my Lu family. This old man will not agree to this. Following a very domineering voice, a carriage was directly carried into the building. For blue-robed men were carrying a brocade carriage. An old man sat on the carriage. His robes were similar to great-grandfather Li's, simple and unadorned. The old man's frame was quite large, so even though he was old, he still appeared mighty. Looking at his age, this old man was not inferior to great-grandfather Li. However, his eyebrows, hair, and beard were still partially black. The black was like a silver frost, making him appear even more stern. Great-grandfather Li was a bit surprised to see this person. "Why are you here? This rash matter couldn't have been ordered by you, right?" Great-grandfather Li glanced at Lu Binji and suddenly realized that this kid had called for reinforcements. The 4 blue-robed men carried the carriage as if they were flying. When they arrived at the hall, their foreheads were already covered in sweat and they were short of breath. However, the 4 of them still carried the carriage steadily, bowed, and gently put it down. Lu Binji was overjoyed and quickly stood up to greet them. "Great-grandfather, you are here." Dugu Yu had already stood up at this time. He bowed to the old man and said respectfully, "Great-grandfather Lu." Ningku was delicate, supported by the boatwoman-like attendant. She stood up like a weak willow facing the wind. She bowed to the old man, but did not say a word. Although this girl was delicate, her temperament was a bit stronger than her brother's. Today, Lu Binji not only wanted to kill the Dugu family's guests, but also wanted to kill the siblings to silence them. The girl did not say it out loud, but in her heart, she had already regarded the Lu family as her enemy. She was already giving him face by bowing to him, so why would she call him anything else? Everyone in the hall stood up and bowed, except for 2 people. One was great-grandfather Li, who was sitting at the head of the table, and the other was Yang Fan. The old man got off the carriage and glanced at Yang Fan. Yang Fan was sitting arrogantly on the table and did not even look at him. The old man laughed and said, "How arrogant! You do have some of the demeanor of our Lu family. Binji, you should learn from others. Don't bow and scrape and be timid all the time. You're losing face for our Lu family." Lu Binji's face was full of smiles, and he repeatedly agreed. Great-grandfather Li's face turned a bit dark. Wasn't this obviously teaching his grandson a lesson, but actually slapping his face? Great-grandfather Li's face darkened, and he said, "Lu Zhongjia, do you think your grandson's outrageous behavior is appropriate?" Directly calling someone by their name was a sign of anger. Great-grandfather Lu's temperament had always been unruly. Otherwise, how could he have taught the arrogant and eccentric young Master Jiang and the domineering Lu Binji? He knew that great-grandfather Li was angry, but he did not give in. He said, "Young people will inevitably make mistakes. When you and I were young, weren't we also frivolous? When a child does something wrong, as an elder, you should give him some pointers and help him out. You shouldn't be siding with an outsider and side with an outsider. If you do that, are you worthy of your child calling you great-grandfather?" Lu Zhongjia glanced at Yang Fan and said, "A mere Ministry of Justice official is worth it for you to give up the friendship between the Lu and Li family for generations? I have already heard about Binji's matter. He has already done something wrong. What should we do? Should we let him go, kill him, and throw him to the bottom of the lake? If he is alive, we won't see him, and if he is dead, we won't see his corpse. Won't that solve everything?" Li Mubai said in a low voice, "This person cannot be killed." Lu Zhongjia raised his thick and white eyebrows and said in a low voice, "Why?" Li Mubai said, "This child is not purely a member of the official family. It is all because of this child that the Southern Command's turbulent times have gathered. He has contributed greatly to us. He is one of us. It's him?" Lu Zhongjia revealed a look of understanding. He looked up and down at Yang Fan. Suddenly he curled his lips and said harshly, "What ability does he have? He is just a pawn of ours. doing things under our control. Thinking of the fact that his most valued grandson was defeated by Shinmu, and that there were many key reasons behind it, Lu Zhongjia hated Yang Fan even more. He turned to Li Mubai and said solemnly, "Old Li, no matter what, this person has already gone against my grandson. He must die." Li Mubai slowly stood up and said in a low voice, "This old man values this person greatly." Lu Zhongjia said, "Is it worth it for you to fall out with me for an outsider?" Ningku was afraid that Li Mubai would be persuaded by old Master Lu. She called out nervously, "Old Master!" Ningku called out, but in her heart she also knew that these elders of aristocratic families have spent their entire lives for the family and power. No matter how kind they usually appear, they're very cold-blooded people in their bones. Everything is for their own benefit. If necessary, they can even give up their own kinship. Now that Lu Zhongjia's words were so serious, would Li Mubai fall out with the Lu family for Yang Fan? Ningku herself did not believe it, so her face was already pale. She called out Old Master Li, but her big eyes that could speak were constantly winking at Yang Fan, hinting him to quickly escape. Although it is not easy to escape, but Old Master Lu is standing in the hall. Can't you think of taking him hostage? However, Ningku kept winking at Yang Fan, but he still sat there steadily. He clearly saw her eyes, but did not know whether it was because he could not react or because he still had hope for Old Master Li. Ningku was anxious and her forehead was dripping with sweat, but she could not shout. Once she shouted, it would be ineffective. Lu Zhongjia stared at Li Mubai and slowly said, "My grandson was wrong, so he has to make the best of it. Once this person dies, everything will be over. This old man will owe you a favor. How about it?" Yang Fan snorted and laughed. He slowly stood up and said with a smile, "What I hate the most in my life is those who regard other people's lives as worthless, arrogant, and pretentious idiots. Usually I feel nauseous when I see one, but today I actually see a whole family. Is it because I did not look at the almanac when I went out today?" Duguyu did not hold him back. Yang Fan had already stepped over from the table full of food and wine. "Your arrogant and ignorant grandson wants to kill me. You, this violent and unreasonable old bastard, discussed with others to kill me. From beginning to end, have you ever thought about asking if I agree or not?" Yang Fan suddenly swung his hand, and something flew out of his sleeve. It passed through the window and flew above Chu River. With a bang, it exploded like a cluster of golden chrysanthemums blooming in the air. Chapter 580. There was a thunderclap on the river, and a burst of fireworks followed. Even though it was daytime, it was still as beautiful as a flower. Immediately after, countless flags were raised behind the trees on the outskirts of the river, and battle cries shook the sky. In Hibiscus Garden, this building was the tallest. It was 3 stories high, and they were standing on the highest floor, looking down at their surroundings. The people in Hibiscus Garden were startled and looked around, but they could only hear the battle cries and couldn't see anyone. But they could clearly see from upstairs that many soldiers and horses had suddenly appeared outside the forest. They were the imperial court's officers and soldiers. Banners fluttered in the wind. Swords and spears flashed in the air. One by one, the cavalrymen rode to and fro, surrounding the entire Hibiscus Garden. Amidst the dust and smoke, dozens of elite cavalrymen galloped towards the Hibiscus Garden from the north and south entrances. Who could stop these cavalrymen? When the scions of the aristocratic families who were scattered around the perimeter saw the soldiers charging towards them, they hesitated and didn't dare to step forward to stop them because they didn't have any intention of rebelling. In addition, their short weapons couldn't block the long spears and halberds of the cavalrymen, so they were immediately scattered. The people upstairs turned pale with fright. What Yang Fan threw out was a firecracker. Firecrackers were also known as fireworks in later generations. They were invented by Li Ji from Luoyang. He was born in the 4th year of Wuda in the Tang dynasty and was later revered as the founder of firecrackers. At present, Firecrackers were only popular in the Hunan and Chu regions, but they were also sold in the two capitals and Dafu. Yang Fan now had a bunch of firecrackers that were bought by Ma Chiao. Ma Chiao accidentally lit firecrackers on a Ding-Ding street in Luoyang, causing a fire during the Shangyuan festival. This incident was still fresh in his memory. When he was strolling in Chang and Anxian City, he accidentally saw these firecrackers and bought 2 bundles. Thinking that children liked excitement, he completely forgot that even if his child was born, how could a child who was less than 1 year old like this kind of loud and shocking thing? When Yang Fan learned that Princess Taiping had just attended Dugu Ninka's banquet and that he was invited by Dugu, he had some doubts in his heart, so he made some preparations. He had tested this kind of thing in the Gongsun mansion, and it was inevitable that 1 out of 10 would fail. He was worried that it would fail this time, so he hid another one in his right sleeve. Seeing this one explode loudly, he was immediately relieved. The horses were whistling, the men were shouting. The distance of several dozen zhang was covered in a flash by a fast horse. In an instant, the Furong Tower was surrounded by a group of officers and soldiers. People were shouting and horses neighing. Iron hooves were trampling on the ground. Long spears were leaping in the air. The momentum was terrifying. The corner of Yang Fan's mouth curved with a hint of disdain. He looked at the pale-faced Lu Zhongjia, then at the bewildered Lu Binji, and said with a cold smile, "Look at you, grandfather and grandson. You two act so majestic, as if the life and death of everyone in the world is in your hands. You don't care about the emperor. You don't care about the common people. When have you ever cared about anyone else? Millennium family? The great aristocratic families that had been passed down for thousands of years were only there because they had a deep foundation and a long history. It didn't mean that they could be the ancestors of the world. You." Yang Fan poked Lu Zhongjia's nose with a finger. "You are high up above, with no one in your eyes, looking at the common people like ants. Do you really think that you can control the whole world? My army is just downstairs. Your private soldiers are highly skilled in martial arts, and their weapons are exquisite. Do you have the guts to fight against the elite soldiers on the battlefield? How would Lu Zhongjia dare? As long as he fought, he would immediately become a traitor. Moreover, with the martial arts of the pugilistic world, he might not be a match for the killing formation of the soldiers. You can, or you can." Yang Fan's finger poked from Lu Zhongjia's nose to Lu Binji, then swept his gaze over the panicking guards under him, and commented with disdain, "Ignorant arrogance!" Li Mubai could no longer care about his ancient Han and Jin style, and asked anxiously, "Yang Langzhong, what do you want?" Yang Fan said in a clear voice, "Killing an official is equivalent to rebelling." The lad of the Lu family gathered people and hid soldiers, intending to kill an official of the imperial court. This is a crime punishable by death. Crossbows and bows are weapons prohibited by the common people. Hiding them is equivalent to rebelling. Not only are these people hiding crossbows, they are not privately made crossbows, but military crossbows. Where did the military crossbows come from? For commoners to hide military crossbows, if not for rebelling, then for what? This is another crime punishable by death. Yang Fan turned to great elderly and said word by word, "This Yang does not want to do anything. Since I am enforcing the law for the country, I will naturally act according to the law. Those who have committed 2 crimes punishable by death naturally deserve to die." When these words came out, everyone was shocked. Lu Zhongjia shouted angrily, "Yang Fan, you are too arrogant. You dare to oppose the Lu family?" Yang Fan slowly turned around, his eyebrows slightly raised, and he sneered, "Who said that I want to oppose the Lu family? Great Elder Lu, when this case spreads to the world, even you, perhaps the person with the highest seniority in the Lu family, will definitely be abandoned by the family. Do you believe me?" Yang Fan slowly took 2 steps forward, facing Lu Zhongjia, his figure like a mountain. Great Elder Lu, who had been insufferably arrogant just now, was trembling with a hunched body. Yang Fan slowly said, "Because if they do not abandon you, your entire family will fall into eternal damnation." That's right, the emperor cannot be enemies with all the aristocratic families. But to eradicate a family is as easy as turning one's hand. Also, I can guarantee that if the emperor has a sufficient reason, an excuse that can shut everyone's mouths, she will definitely cherish this rare opportunity. The Lu family will no longer exist. Lu Zhongjia's body trembled, and his lips moved twice. Suddenly, he roared somewhat crazily, "You cannot do this! You don't forget, you have a relationship with our aristocratic families. If my Lu family suffers a calamity, don't even think about having a good ending." Yang Fan lightly patted the old man's shoulder, causing the old man's body to tremble. Yang Fan said with a smile that was not a smile, "Great, Elder Lu, you really have gone senile. Just now I was still an outsider, and I was even threatened by you two, grandfather and grandson. How did it become in the blink of an eye that I have a close relationship with you?" Lu Zhongjia involuntarily took 2 steps back. Yang Fan bent down slightly and stared into Lu Zhongjia's eyes. Pointing at the tip of his nose, he asked, "Do you believe that I am one of your people? Do you know how many grand families, powerful ministers, and even members of the royal family, Lai Junqin, Zhou Xing, and Qiu Shenji, when they were in power, did they punish them? If you believe that you can bite back at the emperor, do you think they can still enjoy such glory for so long?" Oui. Yang Fan smiled and nodded lightly. "That's right. You have evidence. Even if there is no material evidence, there are witnesses." However, Yang Fan's eyes slowly narrowed. His gaze was like 2 sharp knives that pierced out of his eyes. "Do you really have evidence? Who do you think will stand up to testify for you? Boling Chui, Qinghe Chui, Longxi Li, Zhao Junli, Xingyang Zhang, or Taiyuan Wang? Do you think they are afraid that the emperor doesn't know that the noble families are working together to do something under her nose?" Ha ha ha. Yang Fan burst into laughter. His laughter was as unbridled as Lu Binji's laughter just now. But he had the right to laugh because the person who could decide the life and death of a person with a word was him. As long as he wanted, he could destroy a 1,000-year-old noble family right now. Evidence? Where would he have any evidence? If the Lu family dared to bite the other noble families, they would immediately be abandoned by all the noble families. Even if he had evidence, it would not exist. Even if he really did have evidence, the emperor and the noble families who were not willing to escalate the conflict to the point of death would tacitly ignore it together and destroy it. At that time, not only would the emperor want to kill off the Lu family, but the other noble families would also kick them when they were down and make it so that the Lu family would never be able to reincarnate. The emperor could not kill the Lu family, and a change of dynasty could not destroy the Lu family. But if the other noble families all viewed the Lu family as an enemy, then the Lu family would really be uprooted. Lu Zhongjia had always understood this. He just wanted to scare Yang Fan. But this youth really did not seem to care about the Lu family, a large noble family that could easily crush people into powder in his eyes. Lu Zhongjia's face was pale. He took another 3 steps back, his back completely bent. His pleading gaze could only look toward Li Mubai. Li Mubai sighed inwardly. If you knew this would happen, why did you do it in the beginning? Thinking about it again, what did he say in the past, today, the change from arrogance to deference? All kinds of sudden changes. It was just today the change in an instant. Li Mubai could only give a bitter laugh. Kicking off his wooden clogs, he walked in front of Yang Fan and said in a low voice, "Little husband, where it is possible to let people off, one should forgive them. What I said earlier definitely counts now. If you take a step back, the world will be clear. Why fight until both sides are injured?" With old great-grandfather Li's age, identity, reputation, and status, even if he went to court to see the emperor, he did not need to pay his respects. The emperor would even have to bestow him a seat. But now his words to Yang Fan were almost begging in a low voice, but Yang Fan remained unmoved. Yang Fan turned and walked back to his seat. Sitting down cross-legged, he looked at his nose and calmly said, "Junior will say the same thing as before. I want an explanation." When he heard old great-grandfather Lee say those words in a low voice, Dugayu almost wanted to nod on behalf of Yang Fan. Now that he heard him say this, Dugayu was extremely anxious. Just as he was about to open his mouth to persuade him, he suddenly saw his little sister being supported by the boat maiden and shaking her head. Dugayu's heart skipped a beat, and he swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth. Bang, bang! The stairs gave off a uniform roar, like a war drum, heavily pounding on the bottom of everyone's hearts. 3 Imperial guards in full armor, 1 in front and 2 behind, with their hands on the hilts of their swords, walked up the stairs with a murderous look. With armor weighing dozens of kilograms, coupled with their burly bodies, they did not need to deliberately stomp their feet, but the sound of their footsteps was already very shocking. The 3 of them stepped up the stairs, their eyes sweeping around with dignity, and fixed on Yang Fan, who was sitting cross-legged. The person in the middle cupped his fists and said, "This general has rushed here under orders and awaits the imperial envoy's orders." This person was fully armored, the top of his helmet red like blood, the round shoulder guards on his chest shimmering, and the shoulder guards on his shoulders, because of the action of cupping his fists, were like a fierce tiger yawning, lazily opening its bloody mouth like a sacrificial bull. His face was covered by a black leather mask that looked like black iron, revealing only a pair of heroic eyes. Yang Fan raised his eyelids to glance at him, then lowered his eyes and couldn't help but raise them again. He knew that this was Ma Chiao, but he did not expect that the usually frivolous Ma Chiao would actually be so murderous when he became serious. He couldn't help but look at him again, then lowered his eyelids and gently waved his hand. Ma Chiao and the other 2 retreated to the side, their military boots landing on the ground at the same time. With a crack, they stood there like wooden stakes. Yang Fan's soldiers are at the gates, and he only wanted an explanation. Chapter 581. The Furong Inn was packed with people, but there wasn't a single sound. Only the wind blew in from one row of windows and out from another row of windows, causing the clothes and hair to flutter. Yang Fan sat cross-legged on the seat as though he was meditating. He was calm and composed. When he noticed that the Dugu clan's invitation wasn't so simple, Yang Fan began to make preparations and found the hidden sect. In Yang Fan's opinion, this preparation was sufficient. Even if the Dugu clan had other plans, it wasn't likely to be to use force against him. At most, they had other motives for befriending him. Just in case, it was enough to have the hidden sect's secret support. The fireworks that he brought along were only used as a communication tool with the hidden sect. When he noticed that someone was following him, he sensed that there might be danger. However, his current target was still Dugayu. The peddlers who were selling cakes by the banks of the Chu Chi were people sent by the hidden sect. When Yang Fan was buying the cakes, he originally wanted to tell them about his discovery so that they would be more vigilant. However, when the words reached the tip of his tongue, he suddenly thought of a problem. Hence, he changed his words. The problem he thought of was, Shandong's aristocratic clan's foundation wasn't in Chang. However, it was unknown why the obvious sect and the hidden sect chose Chang, and in the western regions as their footholds. No matter if it was Guanzhong or Longxi, they were all within the Guanlong Corporation's sphere of influence. The Guanlong Corporation was like a centipede. Although it was weak now, it wasn't dead or stiff. Did they really not know that there was such a dragon sleeping soundly beside their bed? Or perhaps they knew but tolerated it. If this wasn't the case, then there was only one explanation. The obvious sect or the hidden sect wasn't just a peripheral organization of the 7 sects and 5 families. It was highly possible that the Guanlong Corporation was a part of it. At the very least, they had reached some kind of agreement. This was a compromise that the aristocratic clans had reached when facing the pressure from Wu Zetian's imperial authority. If this was the case, as one of the important members of the Guanlong Corporation, the Dugu clan, if they wanted to harm him for some special reason, would the hidden sect, which had countless connections with them, still be reliable? If he had to choose between Yang Fan and the Guanlong Corporation, who would the hidden sect choose? Therefore, Yang Fan kept an eye out. He wasn't sure of the hidden sect's attitude and didn't dare to rely on the hidden sect's influence. He treated the hidden sect, who didn't know the inside story, as a mouthpiece. When Yang Fan bought the cakes, he gave 3 instructions to the hidden sect's spy. You can't handle this matter anymore. I don't care what method you use. Hurry up and inform Ma Chao to bring his troops here. Take action when you see my fireworks. Anyone who blocks my way will be killed, without mercy. Fortunately, Yang Fan had this layer of scheming. The hidden sect might not have the intention to harm him, but if they discovered that the people in the Farang were old grandfather Li, old grandfather Lu, and the Duga clan's clan head, it was hard to say if they would still have the courage to jump out and protect Yang Fan. Their roots were aristocratic families. When their sect master saw these 2 old fellows, he had to stand obediently and act like filial sons and grandsons. What else could they do? Now that Ma Chao had arrived, the initiative was in Yang Fan's hands. Of course, Yang Fan was not in a hurry. He was a person, and the other party was a family. He was a hot-blooded man, and the other party was a cold-blooded politician who rolled around in the Vanity Fair all his life. When it came to holding back, who should be careful? Yang Fan, who had been sitting cross-legged in the Farang pavilion, suddenly smiled and said, I can still control the situation for now, but I can't hide the fact that I've mobilized so many troops and horses. When the commander of Chang'an arrives, no one will be able to turn the situation around. This sentence was like a drop of cold water dripping into a pot of boiling oil, and the calm scene finally became restless. Lu Zhongjia had no choice but to concede. He was arrogant, he had no respect for anyone, and he viewed human lives as worthless. But what he couldn't let go of was his family, his glory, his authority, and his inheritance. If he was careless today, all of these might be lost in his hands. Now that he had encountered Yang Fan, a young man who didn't care about the consequences, he had no choice. He couldn't wait to tear Yang Fan into pieces, but his rationality told him that he had to concede. Because Yang Fan could afford to gamble, but he couldn't. Lu Zhongjia took another glance at Li Mubai. He couldn't bring himself to lower his noble head and had no choice but to seek help from Li Mubai. After all, they had known each other for a lifetime. Even if they didn't get along, these matters could still be entrusted to each other. Li Mubai sighed and said to Yang Fan in an old tone, Lu Bin's descendant might be arrogant, but it is a fact that he has never lowered his head to anyone. Now that he is asking you to toast and apologize, it will be a lesson for him. Young Lang Jun, you are so mature. Why do you have to go against him? Li Mubai continued, Moreover, I will make this decision on behalf of the Lu family. I will grant you thousands of acres of fertile land as compensation. You can choose the land you want, whether it's paddy or dry land, it's all up to you. Or, I will give you 10% of the shares of the Lianghuai Tongshi Salt Works. How about that? Dugu Yu couldn't help but gasp. Thousands of acres of fertile land. With this alone, he can immediately become a tyrant. Even if his descendants are very prodigal, this amount of money is enough to protect the Yang family's wealth for generations. The Lianghuai Tongshi Salt Works is one of the 3 largest salt works in the Lianghuai region. I didn't expect this salt works to belong to the Lu family. 10% of the shares? That is an endless stream of money. As long as the Lu family doesn't fall, as long as the Yang family doesn't have a prodigal son who is addicted to gambling, then the Yang family will be able to rely on this towering tree for as long as the Lu family continues to exist. Dugu Yu wasn't someone who didn't see the world, but even as the head of the Duga family, this amount of wealth was still a shocking amount to him. Was this just a sincere apology? 1,000-year-old aristocratic family, with 1,000 years of accumulation, was indeed extraordinary. The Guanlong aristocratic family was just a group of military aristocratic families that rose to power during the rise of the Sui and Tang dynasties. Compared to this, they were practically a group of beggars. Yang Fan didn't seem to hear it at all. He looked out the window and said nonchalantly, "With such a lineup, I'm afraid that the moment the troops move, someone will have already reported to the Luoyang prefecture. Lu Qiantian should be here soon." Chang, and was the place where these aristocratic families were most active. This was because it wasn't under Wu Zetian's watch and was restricted everywhere. Moreover, it was the capital of the Zhou dynasty and had the qualifications to be a political center. Moreover, this was the former capital of the Tang dynasty. Their gathering here also had the purpose of expressing their political leanings. However, it was also because of these reasons that Wu Zetian valued Chang, and no less than Luoyang. In fact, because Chang wasn't under her control all the time, she paid more attention to this place than Luoyang. Thus, how could she not have her trusted aides in Luoyang to monitor the movements of these aristocratic families? Chang, and Magistrate Lu Qiantian was one of Wu Zetian's trusted eyes and ears in Luoyang. If he were to arrive and sniff out something unusual with his sensitive nose, then Lu Zhongjia finally panicked. He anxiously looked at Li Mubai with a pleading gaze. Li Mubai gritted his teeth and said, "Forget it. This time, Jiannan, Qinzhong, and Lingnan are in chaos. The emperor will definitely make a move soon, and there will be a large number of vacant official positions. As long as we let today's matter go, you can choose 3 people from your friends and relatives to report to me. Those who are talented can be given a civil position, and those who aren't talented can be given a military position. All of them will be at least of the 9th rank. How about it?" Land was the foundation of a family and business, and the shares of the salt works were an endless source of money. Not only that, he could also be given 3 more official positions. It was not easy to become an official in the Tang dynasty, and even more difficult to be promoted. Many people spent their entire lives trying to become an official, and after becoming an official, it was even more difficult for them to be promoted. Take Zhang Jianji, for example. He was born in a prestigious family in Xiangyang, and he was a talented scholar. Yet, at the age of 60, he was still a lowly 9th rank county magistrate. Now, as long as Yang Fan were to nominate someone, even if that person wasn't qualified to be an official, he would still be able to become one. Everyone present wanted to nod their heads for him. In fact, when Li Mubai had put forward the first condition, if it had been someone else, they would have hurriedly nodded their head. But Yang Fan had not expressed his position, forcing the Lu family to increase the price layer by layer. Finally, the conditions were so generous that the Dugas siblings simply admired his fishing skills to the point of prostrating themselves in admiration. But Yang Fan just sat there unmoved. Everyone was shocked. Just how big was his appetite? Lu Binji was unable to restrain his anger as he said, "Yang Fan, don't go too far. Even if you have millions of soldiers outside, do you believe that I won't give the order to kill you on the spot?" Yang Fan said leisurely, "I believe you. But even if I die here, can you kill all my people? As long as one of my people walks out alive, you will have to bury the entire Lu family with me. This is a risk that your great-grandfather would not dare to take, great-grandfather Li would not dare to take, and the Duga family would not dare to take." Lu Binji hissed, "I'll kill you right now." "Stop!" Lu Zhongjia shouted as he turned to Yang Fan. Suppressing the hatred in his heart, he chuckled and said, "The younger generation will surpass us in time. The younger generation will surpass us in time. This old man really appreciates you now. How about this? You don't have to choose between the land and the shares. I'll give you all 3 conditions. Moreover, I've just bought 100 young girls from Silla and Korea yesterday. Each and every one of them is charming. Little Lang Jun is a young hero. So, how can you not be accompanied by beautiful women? I'll give them all to you as an apology. How about it?" Lu Zhongjia tossed his beard and laughed. "Don't be afraid that you won't be able to afford them. Wait until you have thousands of acres of fertile land and 10% of the shares in the salt works. Then you'll be able to afford 10 times as many beauties." Lu Zhongjia was laughing heartily, but his heart was already at its peak. It's just that he was shrewd enough, just listening to his hearty laughter. Looking at his benevolent face, nobody could guess what he was thinking. Land, wealth, official position, beauties, and the submission of a millennium-old family. Wine, women, avarice, and temperament. But Yang Fan smiled faintly, just faintly, and said, "Grand Elder Lu's actions are enough to show his sincerity." Lu Zhongjia thought that he had agreed. So he laughed even more heartily. Li Mubai and Duguyu also revealed relaxed smiles on their faces. Yes, wealth, fame, and beauties. A person could pursue everything in life. Moreover, the Lu family was not to be trifled with. So, how could he not agree, if he didn't agree, to make a strong enemy? Who would have thought that Yang Fan's tone would change? He sighed and continued, "But this is not the explanation that this junior wants." Chapter 582. Although it was the Lu family that was forced to lower their heads, as one of the 7 sects and 5 families, the Lu family had to lower their heads to a young man. How could Li Mubai feel proud? Therefore, Li Taigong smiled bitterly and asked bitterly, "What kind of explanation do you want?" Li Mubai came for Yang Fan today. The old man that Lin Zixiong said might want to see Yang Fan was Li Mubai. The person standing behind young Master Jiang was Lu Taigong, and the person standing behind Shinmu was Li Taigong. Li Mubai thought highly of Shinmu. Because of his love for Shinmu, he had a good impression of Yang Fan, who had repeatedly played an important role at critical moments. However, his original intention was only to meet this junior and say a few words of consolation. Perhaps he would even give him some help so that Yang Fan could support Shinmu more. Deep down, it was impossible for a person with a high status to treat Yang Fan as an equal. The help he wanted to give to Yang Fan, to be exact, was a reward from an old man. But now, not only him, but also old man Lu, whose temper was even worse than his and who was even more arrogant than him, had no choice but to lower their heads to a young boy. It was impossible to give him a reward. He rushed to give land, money, and women, and was afraid that he would not accept it. This contrast was really, Yang Fan said decisively, "It's very simple. I want him dead." Yang Fan pointed at Lu Bin, and everyone was in an uproar. Yang Fan had already said this, but no one took it seriously at that time. Everyone just thought that he was saying something mean. If someone intended to harm the eldest grandson of the Lu family, it was reasonable for the Lu family to catch him and force him to commit suicide. But it was a bit weird the other way around. What's more, Yang Fan was neither injured nor dead, and none of his family and friends were injured. How could he want Lu Bin dead? That was the Lu family of Fanyang, once the first family in the world, but now it was only ranked below the Chui family. Such a request was extremely arrogant and unreasonable. Lu Zhongjia suddenly changed his expression. Li Mubai turned pale with fright. Duguyu looked blank, and Lu Bin was furious. Only Kuning looked at Yang Fan with eyes full of inquiry, doubt, and curiosity. She had seen many men, all of whom could be regarded as outstanding young men, but none of them could make her so interested. What kind of man was this Yang Fan? He didn't look like a madman, nor did he look like an idiot. He didn't look like someone who would seek revenge for the smallest grievance, someone who would rather lose his life than let others take even half a step back. But why was he able to make such an unexpected move? Ning's pair of clever eyes stared at Yang Fan, observing the most subtle expression on his face, every flicker of his eyes, every movement of his eyebrows, and every wrinkle of his lips. She still didn't know what Yang Fan wanted to do, but she was sure that Yang Fan must have a purpose. He must have a very good reason. She just looked at him, as if she could see into his heart at once. Ning Ku was very smart, but she didn't have the ability to see through people's hearts. But she didn't know why, when she looked at Yang Fan, she seemed to be able to sense something in his heart. In this world, there were always some things that people couldn't explain. Just like some strangers, some felt like old friends at first sight, and some felt disgusted at first sight without any reason. Buddhists called it good karma and bad karma. They were all caused by the previous life. Since it couldn't be explained, it could only be explained in this way. So, Ningke gave her brother another look. Although Duguyu was puzzled, he obeyed his sister's words. He didn't make a move, so the only one who had come forward to persuade Yang Fan was Li Mubai and old Li Grandpa Li. Old Li had already thrown away his old face. The immortal demeanor he had when he first appeared was nowhere to be seen. Face? How much is face worth? Today, if he was forced by Yang Fan to borrow the power of heaven and really forced Lu Binji to commit suicide, then he would lose all face. Not only would the Lu family lose face, but all the people of the 7 sects and 5 families would also be shamed. Unfortunately, Yang Fan was still unmoved. Suddenly, there was a heavy sound from the stairs. An armored soldier quickly went up the stairs, cupped his fists, and reporting to the imperial envoy. There are flags fluttering in the distance. There are troops moving. It seems that the Chang and commander has already sent the imperial army to Chu River. Looking at their speed, they will arrive soon. The faces of the people in Furong restaurant changed again. Li Mubai said anxiously, "Young Langjun, killing one person will offend the whole family. Why bother?" Yang Fan didn't care and said with a smile, "I believe that in order to protect the whole Lu family, even if you ask old Lu to commit suicide, old Lu would be willing to die. If you don't want Lu Binji to die, then wait to bring a disaster to the whole Lu family. If Lu Guitian comes, I can't hide it. If his death alone could bring peace to the Lu family, Lu Zhongjia would not hesitate to die. But he was willing to die himself. But he didn't want his grandson to die. The Lu family only had 2 brothers. The eldest grandson was a clean freak, and he hated to have sex with a husband and wife. He only had 1 son, and he refused to share the same room with his wife. If the eldest branch wanted to have children, it all depended on this second grandson. Old Lu's face was gloomy and uncertain. All kinds of thoughts came one after another. But how could he come up with a plan? There was a loud noise in the distance. Everyone looked up and saw that a group of people had already arrived at the bridge. "Forget it. I will die." Lu Binji's eyes were about to spit fire. He glared at Yang Fan and suddenly pulled out the sword from the waist of his guard and placed it across his neck. "Binji, don't!" Lu Zhongjia shouted in panic. Fortunately, the guard beside Lu Binji was skilled and quickly grabbed Lu Binji's wrist. The sword was sharp, and it had already cut a bloody line on Lu Binji's neck. Old Lu staggered and almost died from fright. Li Mubai was so angry that he stomped his feet. His wooden clogs slammed against the wooden boards, and the sound of hooves could be heard. "Beta Persei, my son, are you really so heartless? If you aren't afraid of shortening your life, this old man will bow to you and beg you to spare that little bastard." Old Lu's arrogance was gone, and he angrily shouted, "This old man will die in place of my grandson and apologize to you. Yang Langzhong, what do you think?" "Ha ha ha ha." Yang Fan suddenly stood up and supported old Li, who was about to bow. He then said to old Lu, "The 2 elders love this junior, and your sincerity is moving. I only hope that this arrogant kid can understand the 2 elders' good intentions. If you don't want me to kill Lu Binji, it is not difficult. But you have to agree to 3 conditions." Hearing that there was still hope, old Lu looked up and saw that the group of people surrounded by the Chang and token of honor had already crossed the bridge. He was so anxious that his heart almost jumped out of his chest, and he repeatedly said, "Speak, speak, speak, speak quickly, Lu Qiantian is about to arrive." Yang Fan said with a smile, "There is no hurry." He walked over and whispered a few words in Ma Qiao's ear. Hearing this, Ma Qiao's face immediately revealed a strange expression. He glanced at Yang Fan and then at Ning Ku, who was standing quietly and couldn't help but smile as he hurried downstairs. Yang Fan turned back and said with a smile, "All right, General Ma can stop him for a while. Now tell me my conditions." Yang Fan raised a finger and said, "The first condition, Lu Binji immediately returned to the ancestral home of Fanyang, and for the rest of his life, he is not allowed to leave Fanyang." Fanyang was a part of Beijing and Baoding. that was the base of the Lu family of Fanyang. Yang Fan's words sent Lu Binji back to his hometown. Lu Zhongjia was hating his grandson's incompetence, causing him to make a fool of himself at such an old age. He gritted his teeth and said hatefully, "Yes." Yang Fan said again, "The second condition, all the Lu family members scattered everywhere must all return to Fanyang, and cannot come out within 3 years." Lu Zhongjia was startled, and his expression immediately changed. At present, there were many vacant positions in the southern border, and the Lu family of Fanyang was actively participating in the planning, wanting to get a share of the profits. If all the Lu family members returned, wouldn't they miss a good opportunity? Yang Fan's smile was a little cold. "What?" Li Mubai heard Yang Fan's request, and after a moment of daze, his eyes suddenly brightened. All the aristocratic families were fighting for the vacant positions, but although there were many empty positions, there were even more powers fighting for these positions. The aristocratic families only had the advantage in manpower and resources and could not monopolize these positions with one hand. If there was one less Lu family, the other aristocratic families could arrange for 2 more nephews. Li Mubai immediately said in a low voice to Lu Zhongjia, "This Yang Fan is young and spirited and does not fear death. If we do not agree, I'm afraid he would really rather die than drag the Lu family down with him. Old brother, be careful." Lu Zhongjia glared fiercely at him and said in a deep voice, "My Lu family currently has no less than 20 officials in the court. According to what you say, do you want all of them to resign and return home? Although the emperor is eager to suppress the aristocratic families, I'm afraid that if my Lu family really does this, the emperor will instead be restless day and night." Yang Fan said, "The nephews of the Lu family who have already become officials are naturally not included." Hearing this, Lu Zhongjia felt slightly more at ease. After thinking for a moment, he could only reluctantly give up the many vacancies in the south. Gritting his teeth, he said, "I also agree to this condition." Yang Fan said, "The third condition, the nephews of the Lu family will inevitably be dissatisfied with Yang Fan. If in these 3 years there are descendants of the Lu family who have not returned to Fanyang who have the intention to harm me, we will fight and life and death will be up to the heavens. In the future, when the Lu family comes out, they cannot use this as an enemy." This condition was really nothing compared to the second one. Without even thinking, Lu Zhongjia said, "This old man agrees." Yang Fan said, "Good. Then please, Lu Taigong, swear in the name of the Lu family's ancestors that if the Lu family violates this oath, the 1,000-year-old aristocratic family will be destroyed in a day, and there will be no more descendants." This oath, for such a large aristocratic family, was more effective than any poison oath. Since Lu Zhongjia had agreed, he did not hesitate, immediately raising 3 fingers to the sky and loudly swearing. As Yang Fan listened to Lu Zhongjia loudly swearing, a trace of a relaxed smile slowly blossomed on his face. From the beginning to the end, he had never thought of really forcing Lu Binji to death. If he forced Lu Binji to death, the Lu family would definitely not let him off. Whether it was using the Lu family's official power to plot against him, or using death warriors to assassinate him, it would all be extremely dangerous and troublesome. Moreover, the various aristocratic families of the 7 sects and 5 families were competitors, and they also had intertwined interests. For so many years, the Qinghe Chui, Xingyangzhang, Zhao Junli, Longxi Li, Taiyuan Duke, Boling Chui, and Fanyang Lu families had only intermarried internally. This was breaking the bones and connecting the tendons. If he really forced the Lu family to this point, he would offend everyone. In addition, although the Lu clan had enmity with Yang Fan, and Yang Fan's hidden sect and young Master Zhang's visible sect also had enmity, they were allies when it came to dealing with Wu Zetian. An additional ally meant an additional strength. If he really eradicated the Lu family, the one to benefit would only be Wu Zetian. What Yang Fan truly wanted was to force old Madame Lu to make these 3 oaths. He would first force Lu Binji to commit suicide then he would back off. That way, it would be easy for the other party to accept. Confining Lu Bingji in Fan Yang's home was simply a smokescreen to conceal Yang Fan's true intentions. His true goals were only the last two. What Yang Fan cared about the most was naturally the third. However, he had not expected that while he had only proposed the second because he wanted to weaken the Lu family, the one that had truly caused the Lu family great pain was precisely this one. This one had caused the Lu clan to suffer for 100 years. Chapter 583. The reason why Yang Fan had ordered the Lu family to be grounded for 3 years was because of the purge of the southern officials. His enmity with the Lu family was set in stone, and there was no reason to give them a chance to grow stronger. Every blow he could take counted. Moreover, the purge of the southern officials was an opportunity he had created, allowing the Lu family to benefit from it. How sullen would he be? In addition, he had long since prepared to deal with old man Lu's eldest grandson, young Master Jiang. He had secretly implemented this plan while he was still in Luoyang, but he didn't know young Master Jiang's true background at the time. Although he knew he was from one of the 7 sects and 5 families, he couldn't determine which one. Now that he knew he was from the Lu family, he had to force the head of the Lu family to swear an oath that the Lu family would not pursue any conflicts between him and the Lu family within 3 years. This way, he could fight with young Master Jiang without restraint. Otherwise, it wouldn't be safe to send his family to Chang, and if he wanted to make an enemy of a millennium-old family, he would probably have to send his entire family to Java. Lu Zhongjia had no choice but to form an alliance with Yang Fan. From Lu Taigong's point of view, he had only lost a few official positions in the southern frontier, and the impact on the Lu family wasn't that great. But even in death, he didn't expect that these past few years were precisely the critical moment when the world's political situation was changing rapidly. The aristocratic families were so powerful that they made a comeback in just a few years. One step late, every step late. If they missed this opportunity, the Lu family's footsteps would never catch up to others. After Wu Zetian suppressed the aristocratic families for a short period of time, the aristocratic families quickly made a comeback. The 7 sects and 5 families, as well as their branch families, continued to dominate the imperial court. There was nothing that could be done about this. They had the best educational resources, and their disciples were all talented. Their connections in the imperial court were also incomparably strong. If the climate was slightly better, how could they not thrive? For example, the Cui family of the 7 sects and 5 families had more than 20 prime ministers in the 200 years of the Tang dynasty. But the Lu family had always been silent, only gradually recovering in the middle and late Tang dynasty. As a millennium-old family, during the Tang dynasty, the Lu family only had 8 prime ministers, only a third of the Cui family. Among them, the earliest one was the prime minister for a short period of time, more than 90 years later. In other words, Yang Fan's words today had caused this 1,000-year-old family to be depressed for a full 100 years. As long as Yang Fan was alive, no one in the Lu family would be able to pay respects to him. That was not all. Because of today's events, not only did the Lu family's influence decline step by step among the 7 sects and 5 families, but their influence in the obvious and hidden sects of the succession hall was also deteriorating. At the end of the 5th dynasty, the 7 sects and 5 families fell apart, but the succession hall was still thriving. The Lu family had to take the risk and try to eliminate the important figures in the succession hall of the other big families in order to control the entire succession hall and then use the power of the succession hall to revive the family. In the end, the plan failed and the Lu family was eradicated. Only 2 young men managed to escape. One was named Lu Jusi and the other was named Lu Yixing. They did not forget to revive their family. In the end, the 2 brothers were killed by someone. Coincidentally, the person who killed them was also surnamed Yang. Tracing back to the source, everything was caused by today. If Lu Zhongjia had known that the Lu family would pay such a heavy price for agreeing to this condition, he would rather have his 2 grandsons die, or even all the members of the eldest branch, than agree. for a 1,000-year-old family, there was no crueler blow than this. After making the oath, Lu Zhongjia put down his hand and looked at Yang Fan calmly. After all, he was the head of a family. Since the matter had been settled, there was no need for him to be unnecessarily angry, which would only make people despise him. But his grandson, Lu Binji, still stared at Yang Fan fiercely, as if he wanted to pounce on him and tear off a piece of flesh. If Yang Fan forces Lu Binji to die, he will die, and so will his whole family. Doing so will definitely arouse public anger, and none of the 7 sects and 5 families will let him go. But now the Lu family will lose face, and Yang Fan will be safer, and he will be unanimously favored by the other 6 families of the 7 sects and 5 families. Ning Ku thought, and looked at Yang Fan with a very interesting look. This guy fully showed his wisdom and courage. And of course, at the Farang Bridge, he also showed his bravery and outstanding skills. There were many such outstanding children in aristocratic families, but they lived in big and small circles since childhood and were bound by layers of rules and regulations. No one could be as arrogant as him, like this, manly. When these 4 words flashed through his mind, Ning Ku somehow felt a little hot on his face, so he immediately changed the word in his mind. Masculine. Ning Ku was born with a disease, and her physique was naturally weak. Girls always liked strong men, and the weaker the girl, the more so. Ning Ku admired Yang Fan's wild, unruly, and domineering nature. Ning Ku was not the only one who admired Yang Fan. Old Master Li, who was old but didn't die and turned into a thief, admired Yang Fan more than she did, but he still pouted and pretended to be on the same side as the Lu family. Anger was shown on the outside, but joy was hidden within. This was even more powerful than the expressionless poker face. Yang Fan didn't seem to see his expression, and even walked closer to him, smiling politely at him. Lu Biantian is downstairs. If old Master Li and old Master Lu are seen by him, I'm afraid he will figure out something unusual. Can you 2 go away? The old man said angrily, Do you really have a way to hide from Lu Biantian? That young man is as cunning as a fox. Yang Fan still smiled politely. Junior will give it a try. The old man looked at him suspiciously and said to old Master Lu, Let's go. This is the world of young people. We 2 old men should go away. Yang Fan smiled and said, Child Lu, you can't go. You still need to stay and help. Please take the 8 crossbows with you. It's better to throw them into the river, so as not to leave any traces. The 2 old men ignored him and walked to the side room with a sullen face. Yang Fan turned to Ning Ku, bowed deeply, and said politely, Yang Fan has something to trouble you. Ning Ku was delicate and thin, with a palm-sized snow-white face and a sharp chin. Only her big eyes were especially bright. Seeing Yang Fan suddenly walking to her and bowing deeply, Ning's big eyes couldn't help but open even wider, and she asked in surprise, What's wrong? Oh, Mr. Lu, why are you here? When Ma Chao saw Lu Biantian, he immediately showed an expression that was even more surprised than Lu Biantian. Lu Qian was in his 40s. He had a white face and a small beard. His features were elegant, but his eyes were not lively enough. They were always slightly squinted, giving off a sense of craftiness, as if he was plotting against someone. In fact, Lu Biantian only had some eye problems, which was myopia. He had to squint his eyes to see clearly. Lu Guitian's figure and appearance were quite good, but his small eyes were the least attractive of his features. If he continued to squint like this, his eyes would become even smaller, and it would seriously affect his temperament and demeanor. Lu Chechen squinted his eyes as he approached Ma Chiao. Seeing that he was fine, he heaved a sigh of relief and said, Commander Ma, what happened? Why did the Imperial Army's cavalry come out? I was scared when I heard about it in the Yamen. Is there a rebellion in Farang Courtyard? Ma Chiao laughed nonchalantly and said, Oh, it's nothing. It's just that an ignorant thing had a conflict with Imperial Envoy Yang. As the Imperial Envoy's bodyguards, we naturally moved out. Lu Biantian was stunned and said nervously, Conflict? What kind of conflict? Could it be that someone wants to harm the imperial envoy? Ma Qiao said. At first, there was no collision, but later on there was a collision. The imperial envoy came to this banquet without any guards, so he sent someone to inform me. When I heard this, I quickly brought people here. Haha, it's all right now. Because of the urgency of the matter, I forgot to inform His Excellency and made you come all the way here. I'm really sorry. Ma Qiao's words came out of nowhere, so Lu Biantian naturally didn't understand. He squinted his small eyes and looked up suspiciously, then grabbed Ma Qiao's leather wrist guard and asked anxiously, "What's going on?" "Commander Ma, please explain." "Ahem, look at how anxious His Excellency is." "Haha, this is actually what happened." Ma Qiao gestured and explained. Lu Biantian let go of Ma Qiao's hand in a daze and said woodenly, "That's it." Ma Qiao nodded matter-of-factly and said, "Yes, that's what happened." Lu Biantian looked back at the dragon martial army soldiers who had their swords unsheathed and arrows nocked. They looked murderous, as if they were facing a great enemy. Then he looked at the Chang and soldiers with spears and the Chang and government officials who had their hands on their swords. In a hoarse voice he said, "I will go up and take a look." Ta, ta, ta. Lu Biantian lifted his legs high and took light steps. Holding the hem of his robe with both hands, he climbed up the tall building step by step. When he reached the top, he saw the great imperial envoy Yang sitting in high spirits, with his nose in the air. Sitting next to him was a slender girl with an oval face the size of a palm. Her skin was as white as jade, and her facial features were bright and beautiful. Her gentle, smiling eyes were focused on him. On the left sat a black-robed young man. Lu Biantian recognized him as the head of the Dugu family, Dugu. Young Master Dugu looked helpless and was drinking silently. On the right sat a young man in a white robe. Lu Biantian also recognized him as Lu Binji of the Lu family in Fanyang. Young Master Lu's face turned red and green. He looked indescribably ugly, from the bulging veins on his forehead. One could see that he was suppressing his anger, but he didn't dare to explode. Behind this pair of black and white impermanents were 7 or 8 guards. Each guard stood there empty-handed, like a flock of lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Behind them stood 2 rows of burly men, all dressed in shining armor and holding swords. They looked like a group of fiends in the Hall of Limbo. The muscles on Lu Qiantian's cheeks suddenly twitched a few times. The imperial envoy flew into a rage and sent the 3 armies to Tsuchi. I didn't know what kind of disaster had happened here, so I rushed over in a hurry. It turns out that the imperial envoy was fighting with someone for a woman's favor. It's true that Chang and is the old capital of Haojing, but you don't have to reenact the fire beacons teasing the feudal vassals, do you?